the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Alex. Back in the morning right here on Talk. So, as you will be fully aware by now, the UK has secured its first trade deal with the United States since Donald Trump's trade war, with the government claiming it will save vital jobs, slashing tariffs on British steel, aluminium, cutting car levies to 10%. The list apparently goes on. Here's a question. Will America save the UK? Just think of it in those kind of terms. What are you making of where we're at? In a couple of weeks' time, we've got the EU trade deal. What is that going to look like? Also this afternoon, 2 men have been found guilty of cutting down that world-famous Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland. They drove 30 miles through a massive storm to fell it with a chainsaw, revelling in the news coverage that followed. This pair of bozos, I believe, if you want to see an image of a couple of thickos, just look up this pair of half-wits. They're beyond anything you could ever imagine, but absolutely the people you would think would do something as stupid as this. We'll look at that story in a few moments. And Bill Gates has pledged to give away 99% of his fortune over the next 20 years, with plans to accelerate donations through his foundation and wind it down by 2045. He doesn't believe you should leave the planet really with anything. Just give it all away. What a nice man. We'll have more on that a little later as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Will America save the UK? So interesting kind of couple of weeks, the Indian, well, few days in fact, the Indian trade deal, the American trade deal. Week after next, there's an EU trade deal. That is going to be interesting what America does with the EU, because that will give some context to what has happened with us. But the deal we have with America is better than this time yesterday. But probably not better than it was 6 months ago. That seems to be roughly the mood music. We haven't got the worst deal, we've got the best of a, well, not great choice of deals. Seems to be the word on the street. It's not historic, it's not comprehensive, it's a deal, okay? And it should be said, it's work in progress. There was a curious bit of kind of pantomime almost between Donald Trump. I mean, what a strange... Donald Trump flanked by Peter Mandelson. And Mandelson sitting there in the opulence of the Oval Office, or standing there, making some, apparently, some amusing, vaguely amusing remarks. And over at the other end, you had Keir Starmer, who looked as he was kind of in a staff canteen somewhere or a 1970s lecture hall, on speakerphone from a side angle. I mean, whoever in Downing Street put that together should be walking the plank. But the announcement does offer some relief for key UK industries from some of those new tariffs that President Trump has announced since his return to the White House, but it will leave a 10% duty in place on most goods from the UK. Hailed by the leaders of both countries as significant, analysts said it did not appear to meaningfully alter the terms of trade between the two countries. It's a deal not hugely significant, I think, is the upshot of that. No formal deal was signed yesterday, and announcements from both governments, of course, didn't give the fuller detail. We'll get that in the fullness of time. The staff canteen, or the lecture hall that Keir Starmer appeared to be sitting in, was in fact the Jaguar Land Rover factory in the West Midlands. He described it, Mr Starmer, as a fantastic platform. This is a historic deal, delivers for British business and British workers, protecting thousands of jobs in key sectors, including car manufacturing and steel. Yeah, loads of people work for steel over here, don't they? He said, adding that the UK has no greater ally than the United States. And Mr Trump said that himself. You know, we're not meant to pick a favourite country, but it's kind of you guys, sort of. Does he say that to all the girls? 0344 499 1000. I'm going to ask the general question of how do you rate this? But I suppose the wider question, bearing in mind the Brexit freedoms we're hearing a lot about in the last 24 hours that has allowed us to sit around the table autonomously from the big old bloc that we used to be part of, is that likely to be an area that the United States becomes, we have to develop it over time, but they become our biggest ally in every respect. And bearing in mind that they've got some troubles over there. But will America actually save the UK in a curious kind of way? I mean, there's some bad stuff going on over in Germany. Other countries in the EU not faring so well. I mean, they'll pick up at some point. These things are cyclical. Will America save the UK? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this. And the other big stories of the day. George Pascoe-Watson is with us, former political editor, it should say, over there at The Sun. You almost got promoted then, George. Not that, not that you couldn't have done that job standing on your head, as it were. Good afternoon.
Ian, great to see you again.
And indeed.
What a great question you're asking about the US and could they save Britain? I was looking at the Financial Times this morning, not a newspaper which is particularly supportive of Trump in any way. They say not even the architects of the trade deal announced yesterday would describe it as a thing of economic or legal beauty.
Yeah.
There isn't even a signed document here. I think Keir Starmer has taken a view here that for PR purposes, having a great optic, as we say in communications, it looks like he's closer to Trump than anybody else. We had that telephone call, as you said yesterday, that live broadcast. Starmer has calculated that it's worth having the perception of Britain getting a better deal than anybody else.
Yep.
The downside, of course, is it's not signed. It's not really helping anybody other than the steel and the car and maybe the farmers. Industries. It looks more like a protection payment, I would say, and definitely it prevents the Prime Minister from doing negotiated business on all of the other 10% tariffs, which still remain across the board. So it may look good on the face of it, but and that's something which, don't forget, if you're Keir Starmer and his team, is great to have, because you've had some bad headlines over the last 9 months. So it's worth it in that respect, but it may well hold him back in terms of doing the deal. They talked about it being historic. It's certainly not historic. And it's certainly not a free trade agreement. And if you think about growth in this country that is so badly needed, we're being hampered by new employment right legislation, the cost of energy, and a whole host of other things which still need to be tackled.
Indeed. It's worth reminding, I mentioned at the beginning, George, there was a lot of kind of choreography behind all of this. There was the president, JD on one side, Peter Mandelson, man alive, did he love that moment, on the other side of it. Let's remind ourselves then of the moment the US president spoke with Keir Starmer.
I'd like to introduce him now to say a few words. Mr. Prime Minister, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President, Donald, and this is a really fantastic, historic day in which we can announce this deal between our two great countries.
Well, I'll come back to the optics of that in a moment, George, but let's remind ourselves as well what Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Tory party, said yesterday on this.
This is not a free trade agreement. This was not what we were signing. What's happened is a small tariff deal to fix some of the changes which Donald Trump made last month. We are now in a worse position than we were in March. That's not something to write home about. I think we need to be honest about what we're doing here. If he had come out and said that we're trying to fix a problem that was created last month, I think that we would have understood that. But calling it a historic deal is trying to sell people a pub. Just be honest about what you've done rather than pretend that this is a historic deal that's going to change everyone's lives. We are in a worse position than March. So yes, businesses will welcome this. We're glad to see some improvement, but we're still in a worse position.
I thought, George, that Kemi Badenoch's response was actually bang on there. It sort of reflected much of what you just said. But just a word, as somebody who knows their way around the political world, George, and also the public relations world too. I mean, making your big announcement on a speakerphone, I know that line did right itself after about 3 minutes. And a side angle in the basement of a factory against Donald Trump in the opulence of the Oval Office, that wasn't a great look in order to sell this as the big moment of the year.
It was the very last thing the people in Downing Street would have wanted. I'm very sure of that. Yeah. There's serious professionals in Number 10 whose job it is to fix things and make things look great and appear good. it probably is a reflection of just how lastminute.com the agreement was. And I think probably people will be reviewing how it came across. But in the end, I think the critical thing will be the durability of the deal and whether or not Starmer is able to continue to negotiate with Trump. I mean, politics is all about perception. It's all about how you present things. And I hear what Kemi Badenoch said, we're in a worse position than we were in March, for sure. But then, you know, when the Conservatives were in power, Donald Trump was not in power. And, you know, he's changed the game. And really, if she was in power, or Farage, or any of the political parties, whoever's the prime minister of this country, dealing with Donald Trump and that administration is pretty tough. And I have to say, I slightly take my hat off to Lord Mandelson, who's Britain's ambassador to Washington now. He is, if nothing else, he is an extremely gifted political maneuverer, and that, in the end, is what ambassadors have to be.
Yeah.
The one thing I did think was that Starmer's team would be really popping the champagne at having managed to pull this off, only for an hour later a pope to be elected and to sort of slightly dilute the strength of the story.
Indeed, and an American pope at that as well. I mean, what's interesting, George, is that I did wonder, bearing in mind Starmer was apparently pulled away from the Arsenal match the night before so he could have a chat with Trump. Could Donald Trump have done a favour for Keir Starmer here? Because, as you rightly say, there's nothing signed. There's some detail, but not loads. It's certainly not historic. It's a lot about the optics. Could that be? Did Starmer need this to happen almost this week, on the back of the India deal, to sort of create a momentum, as it were? Would the president have done that as a favour to him?
I don't think Donald Trump is in the business of doing favors. He certainly would want something in return. And it's very interesting as we ask ourselves, what are we giving away to be this place in the queue? But I definitely think it's been a help to the Keir Starmer administration. The India deal, although actually behind the scenes is actually a very good deal in many respects, and a number of British companies have been lifted as a result of it. It wasn't presented particularly well. Communications is so fundamental in everything, but particularly in politics in today's day and age. And that's a game that the Labour Party in government have not been playing particularly well. They've changed the team now, and things are beginning to get a little bit more on track. But I defy anybody to deal successfully with the Trump administration because it's so confident in its own communication. Yeah. It's kind of hard. So finding out where you want to sit in that is really, really hard. It's the advice that people like me give to people, and it's not easy. So I think it's been net. Starmer will probably feel he's had a pretty good week when it all comes down to it tonight, as he pours a gin and tonic.
Indeed, or something similar. Here's another story, George. This broke in the last couple of hours. This pair of characters who've been convicted of criminal damage for the felling of the iconic Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland. This was back in September 2023. I said at the beginning, you know, I know you shouldn't, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because somebody looks like a wrong and doesn't make him a wrong, and usually does, but that's another story. This pair look like the kind of bozos that might do something like this. They are going to face, potential prison for this. What I was wondering about, it's a stupid thing to do. It was a, mean thing to do. It was historic. It had been there forever, and a couple of Herberts come along and just cut it down. But does it make the crime any worse if it's something of note? If you chopped a tree down further down the wall, as it were, is that any worse or better? I'm trying to work out whether the offence is more of a moral offence than a criminal one in many respects.
Well, and we know the law rightly does not make a distinction on moral equivalence, and that's how it should be. So technically, the law is the law is the law. I just reflect, last night I was at the Royal Albert Hall for the VE Day celebrations and commemorations, which was a very uplifting moment where we celebrated people, young men and women who gave their lives and sacrificed it for the great of this country and its future. And then the very next day, these guys get rightly convicted. And in a way, I'm pleased that there are juries here in the UK justice system who are there to do the right thing. Because that that's the thing that really we're focused on and that matters for this country.
Yeah, and they were so stupid and moronic, this pair, that they boasted. They didn't just do it; they boasted about it. They enjoyed seeing it on the news. They had stuff on their phones. They thought it was a photo of the photos on their phones that acted like some kind of trophy. You sort of do wonder where some of our fellow humans are on the evolutionary scale.
Well, I mean, it's pretty base stuff, but of course there are lots of people now who are excited and enthused by the prospect of being in social media, becoming little mini stars.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of world we find ourselves in now. Everybody wants fame for 5 minutes, and that was their route to doing it. And I just hope, actually, the fact that they've been convicted reminds the whole of the nation that no matter how crazy an idea you've got in your head, you need to respect people and the community and the country in which you live, because, you know, we didn't get this freedom and liberty and live in this beautiful country for free. It was paid for by the blood of many millions of people.
Yeah, spot on. George, stay with us. George Pascoe-Watson is with us, former political editor over there at The Sun. We'll have more. We'll talk Bill Gates giving his money away. The new Pope, Pope Leo, the wokey popey. Is that the story there? And MPs seeking assurance that UK gender guidance will not ignore trans people. More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news. I want your response as well on this this trade deal, and particularly will America save the UK? And then where is our future economically best placed? Is it with America, or is it with the European Union, which of course is a bigger deal, but it's a collection of countries. In terms of a single country that we trade best with, it is America. But where is it in our best economic interest going forward? 0344 499 1000.
He's not a MAGA Pope, right? And the fact that this would have already been known, I think that would have worked in his favour. So they would have thought, this is a good, and of course I'm assuming, I don't know what the Cardinals are thinking, but they would have thought, this is a good foil for Donald Trump. We aren't going to get a MAGA Pope. But the fact that he was elected very quickly, or relatively quickly, I think shows that he also had managed to garner support from the Conservative faction as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Let's move to that other big story as well. George Pascoe Watson is with us, former political editor at The Sun, founding partner of Schillings Communications. That story that you alluded to at the beginning, George, the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Interesting, first American Pope, North American Pope, born in Chicago, rose from altar boy to cardinal under Pope Francis, known for his missionary work in Peru, helped flood victims in 2022. Is there no end to this man's benevolence and beauty? Let's have a listen to the words of the new Pope.
I will sing a new song to the Lord because he has done marvels. And indeed, not just with me, but with all of us, my brother cardinals, as we celebrate this morning, I invite you to recognize the marvels that the Lord has done, the blessings that the Lord continues to pour out upon all of us. Through the ministry of Peter, you have called me to carry that cross and to be blessed with that mission. And I know I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me as we continue as a church, as a community of friends of Jesus, as believers, to announce the good news, to announce the gospel.
And George, it seems, possibly in my life, I don't think I've ever heard a Pope speak in just ordinary English, if you like. I know it sounds like a strange point, but it seems really unusual to hear a guy with a Chicago accent who is the Pope.
You're making a really good point. And there are two things I would say. One of which is he's sort of American Chicago. And of course, that means his language is much more the language of the world. And therefore, there's a chance that he will reach audiences way beyond the usual Roman Catholic audience. And that probably is going to be good for the church. And the fact that he's, I think, 67, 69, means he's much more energetic, probably, than previous popes. That means he's going to be more physically active, and I think he'll travel more and you'll see more of him around the world. And again, from a recruitment perspective, in a world where church audiences, church congregations seem to be dwindling, I think that's going to be very good for the Roman Catholic faith as well, in terms of driving up numbers and relevance, because relevance is all for church, for religion in today's world. And so, if you like, he's been a pope picked for the right time with the right image.
It's already, the headlines are saying, though, this is the woke Pope. They've looked, he's a man who had a social media footprint before being given the big job. George, you know what it's like journalistically. You always have a little look and a ruffle around to see what you can find. And he's made his points known on all sorts of things, from gun crime to the previous Trump administration, apparently.
And it's quite clear that he has been critical of certain statements made by Vance and others. And that, I think, will be interesting. But of course, the new administration in the United States very much wants to throw its arms around an American, the first United States Pope. And already you can see former presidents also demonstrating that they're so proud of having a United States Pope. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see how that blows out. But as I say, you can't really be high in office today without having some presence in social media. And I think that what will be interesting will be how he manages his profile. Yeah. Don't forget, this gives him enormous power.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And this story, Bill Gates planning to give away most of his fortune by 2045, George. Now, of course, he's worth a lot of money, is Bill Gates, about £108 billion, apparently. And he's going to give it away in the next 20 years. Now, when that comes up on, on a sort of Trivial Pursuit or pub quiz question, who's the richest person in the world? I mean, I normally try and say George Pascoe Watson at one point, because I know you're in the top three, George. But you've got Elon Musk and Bill Gates in front of you. I quite like this, because I honestly believe that I would, if I was in this position, I think I would do exactly the same. And he's citing Andrew Carnegie, who said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." Why would you, give the money away? Do something good with it. And he does a fairly big benevolent job already, even though some people, for other reasons, don't much like the guy.
Yeah, Bill Gates gives away all of his money as it is in terms of foundation. He's not giving it away. He's very structured. He's very focused on the work that he wants to do, and it's very welcome work. Of course, there are going to be organizations and individuals who take a view that he's doing the wrong thing or pursuing the wrong interests, but that's for another day. The critical thing is it's a fantastic signal to send. There are many very ultra-rich people in the world. Nobody gets quite close to him and Musk. It's very easy to forget what that kind of wealth looks like, because none of us really know what it looks like. And you just by breathing, you multiply your wealth.
100%.
Because it's so invested. So it's great that he's done this. I think it's a fantastic signal. The point he's trying to make, Ian, is he wants to get rid of the money now so it can do good use now when it's needed. And boy, if you look around the world and the challenges we've got, is it needed? It's totally needed.
Absolutely. Listen, George, great to have you on. Great to see you again. Have a cracking weekend. He is George Pascoe-Watson, legendary former political editor over there at The Sun, founding partner of Schillings Communication. Gates' foundation aims to eliminate preventable diseases, eradicate poverty, tackle infectious diseases like malaria and measles globally. He doesn't always enamour everybody into the same group of, this guy is great. He's a bit of an oddball, Bill Gates. If you look at Elon Musk's an oddball, right? I mean, there's something about guys like that sort of, the fact they've got to that place and they have kind of, what's the word? It's sort of investigative, curious minds. Their brains think in slightly different ways. That phrase, they would probably both be on the spectrum somewhere. I think Bill Gates' daughter even alluded to that in a recent interview. They kind of function in that way. They have a curious kind of sort of template of what reality looks like. They don't always make great friends. They're clunky and awkward, bit odd, not as a pejorative, just genuine observation. But if you've got that amount, but Bill Gates does, I think it was really the COVID thing, wasn't it, that really kind of sort of threw him under the bus, where those that didn't much like the idea of a vaccine decided that Bill Gates was, the problem here, even though Bill Gates wasn't actually the COVID vaccine man. But nonetheless, he was seen as, a man that was certainly making the point. But the other stuff that he's done, the preventable disease, eradicating poverty, I mean, you've given away, you want to give away £108 billion, and yet you mention his name and somebody will doubtless message me now and say, Bill Gates, sheer evil. Evil? Wow. I mean, if that's evil, God, I can't imagine what somebody else who chops down a sycamore tree might be described as. Goodness me. We'll take some calls and comments on that, and also that main question, will America save the UK? And I'm going to bolt on to the side of that, bearing in mind we've got an EU trade deal coming around the corner in a couple of weeks' time. Where are we kind of best served as a nation? Where do you as a Brit feel most comfortable in terms of kinship? Would that be with the EU or would it be with the United States? And both are in fairly wobbly positions financially. They might circumnavigate a recession in America. The EU is not in a great place. Germany in particular should be the powerhouse of the European Union, is in a terrible place. France not much better. Other countries are really just kind of just about getting by. As we are in this country, things aren't great here. Where are we likely to find our kind of those sunny uplands? Is that going to be ultimately with a better deal with the EU, or will it be the United States? And I think we saw from the deal yesterday that we're in a better position than we were this time yesterday before the deal was announced, but probably not a better position in any kind of significant way in terms of what a trading deal is meant to be. I don't think anybody's popping the champagne and going, wow, look at what we've got here. It's not really, I don't think it's settling like that at the moment. But, work in progress. Maybe it will get better. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
David says Mandelson really stitched Starmer up like a kippy yesterday. He sent Starmer to the Midlands to speak to the president of the free world from the Kazi of a factory on a Mickey Mouse phone, whilst he literally lauded it up with Donny in the Oval Office, chuffing on the Havanas. I bet Mandelson was laughing his head off, says Dave. They are quite pally, apparently, Mandelson and Starmer. And it was oddly, I mean, it's a lovely way to look at it. Apparently it was the other way, would have been the other way around. The ambassador would always be there at that kind of moment. But why anyone in Downing Street, and you're quite right, David, in the optics of it, why anyone in Downing Street would have decided that the best optics for that moment was to have Starmer in this. I mean, it wasn't even if it was a factory that had some life around it, you know, some background. So, you know, I don't know, it was a Jaguar Land Rover, wasn't it, or something? He could have had a beautiful shiny car there. Could have been sitting in the car for good, on top of the car, whatever, sprawled across the bonnet. But something, but it looked like something from 1972, with a load of people around him who clearly were factory people, whether they were management, directors or workers, I don't know. But we didn't know who they were. And it was a side angle and it looked rubber, Mr. President, Donald. It just didn't, you know, it came across as... somebody in Downing Street there'll be rows, but they're still ongoing. There's people right now in Downing Street not talking to each other over who gave the green light for that. That's something that should have been, you're going to have the President of the United States sitting there in the Oval Office, which is a fairly opulent and rather beautiful setting, a nice oak desk, flanked by flags, the Vice President, the Ambassador, a couple of other characters, all looking amazing, and Donald Trump in the basement of a factory, surrounded by nameless people, and the whole thing was very grey, wasn't it? There was no colour in the scene at all, none whatsoever. But the Prime Minister insists the trade deal doesn't mean choosing the US over the European Union. Tariffs will be removed on British steel and aluminium in exchange for greater access by American agriculture. Ministers claim it will also protect 150,000 jobs, although there is some debate on that. Let's have a listen to the moment the US President spoke with the Prime Minister yesterday.
I'd like to introduce him now to say a few words. Mr. Prime Minister, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President, Donald. And this is a really fantastic, historic day in which we can announce this deal between our two great countries.
Well, there it is. That's how it kind of began, and it carried on for a bit, and then they said goodbye, and off they went to celebrate was I think the intention. Whether it eventually came to that as people began to crunch the numbers is another issue. Certainly the Conservatives were quick off the mark. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, challenged the deal yesterday. Here's what she had to say. Have a listen.
This is not a free trade agreement. This was not what we were signing. What's happened is a small tariff deal to fix some of the changes which Donald Trump made last month. We are now in a worse position than we were in March. That's not something to write home about. I think we need to be honest about what we're doing here. If he had come out and said that we're trying to fix a problem that was created last month, I think that we would have understood that. But calling it a historic deal is trying to sell people a pub. Just be honest about what you've done rather than pretend that this is a historic deal that's going to change everyone's lives. We are in a worse position than March. So yes, businesses will welcome this. We're glad to see some improvement, but we're still in a worse position.
Well, there it is. Let's speak with David Payton, Professor of Industrial Economics, Nottingham University Business School, so former government advisor to the Department of Trade and Industry. David, good afternoon to you. I think Kemi Badenoch's point there, which seems to be echoed by a fair few people, it's a better position than we were in 24 hours ago, but not a better position than we were in 24 weeks ago. Does that make sense? Is that fair?
To some extent, I think two things can be true. You know, there's a lot that's not in this deal. It's reasonably limited, but the things that are in there are indeed very important. And compared to March, Yet the US has decided to increase tariffs across the board. That's a new reality. But let's be clear. Our tariffs, for example, on cars will now be much lower than those facing the European Union. So effectively, even relative to March, we're in a better position relative to other competitors. So that's going to be really welcome to the industry. And some of the things in there are very important. We're avoiding the 25% tariffs on cars, for Rolls-Royce, for airplane engines, for steel and aluminium. And they're very important, but also the other way around. It's sometimes seen as a trade-off in terms of what we offer. Yeah. Actually, reducing tariffs on things like orange juice from America that we don't produce in our country is really a win-win. That means that consumers can face lower prices. We can have a broader range of places to source our food goods. So there's lots to be pleased about with this deal.
I suppose, and thinking about the sort of this curious tariff game that Donald Trump's been playing, that I don't even think he knows what the rules of it are. I just think they sort of depends on how he got out of bed in the morning, depends on whether they're going to go up or whether they're going to go down. He's been playing a bit of a game with China, of course. I mean, I understand that, what's supposedly behind it. But we had this the other week, didn't we, when it looked as if we were in a better position than the EU, and then he sort of harmonised those tariffs and we were all in the same boat. Could this then happen when Trump does further agreements with the European Union? Because at the moment it looks like we are in a slightly better position than France or Germany because we can negotiate autonomously. But if going forward a couple of months they end up with a deal that looks remarkably like our one, then nothing really changes in terms of our competitive advantage, as it were.
I think that remains to be seen. I think the problem with negotiating with the European Union is that they have so many countries and competing interests. It tends to be much harder to do a deal with them. So I think over the past few years, we've been able to do trade deals. Now we're outside the European Union with Australia, with New Zealand. We've got one coming up with the Gulf states, now with the US, recently with India. So we're much more agile and flexible being out of the EU. I think if you're a manufacturer, say, of cars, and you're looking to where the risks are lower, and you're thinking, well, is it Germany? Is it the UK? Both countries have problems with high energy costs. But when you're looking at the relationship with that important export market of the US, you would now be thinking, actually, the UK is a much lower risk. We've got the certainty of at least a trade deal. So we're back to the sort of baseline 10% tariffs, which seems to be the new reality with Donald Trump, whereas the EU are currently facing 25%. They may come up with a deal, but there's absolutely no guarantee that it will happen or that it will happen quickly.
I mean, schoolboy question here, but couldn't everybody just get rid of all tariffs and just carry on trading? And would that not be equally as fair in a curious way?
Sure. The general economist view is that, lower tariffs are better all round, and actually sometimes seen as that, we lose by having tariffs on our exports. Actually, we lose by putting tariffs on our imports, because imports are generally things that we want, often that we can't produce. And by putting tariffs, we increase the price. But there are counter arguments. So Trump's argument, rightly or wrongly, is that tariffs can be used effectively as a tax. So they don't have a VAT like we do in the UK. So we can see it as a tax which will raise revenue for the government. And for him, it's a tax relatively higher on overseas producers. So he's clearly got this agenda of trying to reduce sort of the globalization, to bring manufacturing back to the US. And in a big economy like the US, where they can manufacture most things, that probably makes a bit more sense than it might do in a small, open trading economy like the UK. So the UK, we're benefiting from this trade deal. But the bigger context is that we've recently had trade deals with the Pacific Bloc, with India, with Australia, with New Zealand, with Canada. And we still have a very strong deal with the European Union. So since leaving the EU, to some extent, we've been able to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I think am I right in saying we revisit the EU deal in a couple of weeks' time? So there'll be more to come from that?
Yeah, the government is looking to that. I think we need to be careful about that. Our trade with the EU, it's hard to know exactly how much it's been affected because the way of measuring it has changed, but probably not that much overall. Goods perhaps, but services have increased quite significantly. So we already have a very strong trade deal with the EU, no tariffs, no quotas. So the scope for improvements there are very limited. I think the danger is that we have a deal which sort of ties us more to their rules and regulations, which of course may be costly for us and may make it harder to do deals elsewhere. So there's a worry that perhaps we may move too close to the EU, where there's not that much scope for doing much better. There's probably some benefit if we can reduce some of the red tape, particularly for smaller exporters, but we want to be sure that we don't do that at the risk of tying our rules and regulations and laws to those of the EU.
This deal yesterday isn't a signed deal yet. It's also, to coin that phrase, kind of work in progress. I mean, the fuller details yet to be established. I think Mandelson, the ambassador, made a point that it was this is not a still photograph. It's a typical sort of Mandelson kind of statement. It's not a still photograph. It's a moving picture or something like that. But he's right, isn't he? I mean, there is more to come, and these things also evolve. They're not cast in stone and bang, that's it for the rest of time.
Yes, that's right. There's still uncertainty exactly when the measures, even in this deal, will take place. As long as they happen, that's a significant gain. Yeah. But yet there's certainly much more to do, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. But the most important sector in terms of exports for the UK is our services. And the US is a very big market for us in terms of exporting services. And there's certainly scope there in terms of mutually recognising professional qualifications and other things we can do to make it a little bit easier to transfer between the two countries. So, yeah, there is scope. The US is our biggest single trading partner. This deal will be helpful, I think, in terms of cementing that. But this is where the government's looking for its growth agenda. This is a faster growing part of the world, as is India, the Pacific region, Australia, Canada, and so on. So these are the areas where we can perhaps find scope for growth in the UK economy. So, there are reasons to be optimistic. There are big problems in the UK economy, but they're not so much to do with trade, more with our high energy prices and the impact, for example, on our chemical industry. We've seen just today with threats to another factory. That's a really big issue for growth in this country. But for the moment, the trade deals with India and the US are certainly a positive on balance for the economy, and give us some room for optimism going forward. Yeah,
and growth isn't something that is featured very much since the financial crash. It's just been pretty sluggish at best over the last almost 2 decades moving towards. Is the answer to that is the place or the region, the country that can assist us most going to be the United States? Will they be our saviour, David?
I think saviour is too strong a word for it. The US is very important. It's grown much faster than the UK or most countries in the European Union over the past 10 years. So there is better scope for growth. Similarly, other fast-growing countries in the Pacific and around the world. But really, the big anchor holding back growth in the economy is our energy crisis, really. And that's not too strong a word for it. We have the highest energy costs in the world for industrial users. We've seen the chemicals industry gradually moving out of the country. This is where the car industry has been hit. We're not producing oil and gas. So this is the real thing that's holding back the economy until the government take hold of that and stop thinking that renewables and the path to net zero is somehow going to decrease energy costs against it's just the exact opposite of what's been happening. Sure. Then we're going to really struggle with growing fast. But these trade deals will help, particularly with these faster growing economies around the world.
Indeed. David, great to have you on, sir. Thank you for your time. David Payton, Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham University Business School, also former government advisor to the Department of Trade and Industry. Over to you on this one as well. Where are we best served? America or the EU? This one in from Nikki, who says the US-UK deal was not a full trade agreement, just a limited arrangement cutting some tariffs, like on whiskey and steel, and improving trade cooperation. It doesn't stop the US from doing bigger deals with the EU later. As for Trump or any other future US president, it's absolutely possible they will seek deals with the EU, perhaps even more comprehensive ones, if it aligns with the American interest. The EU is a far larger market, so any US administration will weigh that heavily. Yeah, that's going to be a good point, because what's Trump's like? We've got this idea that he's a supporter of Brexit and he doesn't like the EU because of not stepping up to the plate financially, NATO and all that goes with it. So I get that. But Trump is Trump. He's a businessman first and foremost. If he thinks there's money in them there Brussels hills, he's going to carve out the best deal. It may well turn out that the EU get a better deal with America than we get, because it's a bigger trading bloc, and as was just said there, it is more advantageous to Trump. How do you see this panning out? Where should our loyalties be? What is the country or the region that can save the day when it comes to the UK? Because what we really need is growth. We need something that's going to remove this sort of static feeling. America, in the last few years, I don't believe anything to do with the brilliance of Biden, by the way, but it had a bit of, it was on a roll for a bit, and it was looking good. While everybody else around the world was looking a little sluggish, America was kind of moving forward quite dynamically and progressively, financially speaking. So it's kind of interesting that we haven't had that for a long, long time. And I don't think that's necessarily down to the ineptitude of any one government. Every government wants to grow. They all know what you're supposed to do. And even if the individual politicians don't know, they've got enough people around them, for God's sake, paid impressive salaries and the like, that can point them in the right direction. But it's just not really happening. We don't have those. Remember those heady days of the 90s when everyone was financially having it off royally? Growth was all over the place. You could have a mortgage application approved if it was written on the inside of your leg. The lollipop lady had a property portfolio. Credit cards were being given away like flyers in the high street. I mean, it was just extraordinary. So there was a lot of debt being built up, by the way, around all of that. But there was that sense that we're, hey, you know, Britpop was doing its thing. Haven't had one of those, have we? How do we get one of those moments? What does the UK have to do to kind of fire itself up, get that furnace well and truly burning to the point of a financial explosion that sees us grow, that sees people coming out of work with a smile on their face, where debt isn't around the necks of almost every other person you bump into, where buying a property is completely probable rather than impossible for many people. Going on holiday can be done with a cash payment rather than sticking it on the plastic. Where are those days? How do we get those days back? I don't think we're going to get that with a little deal with America or a little deal with the EU. What is the answer to our financial woes in that respect? 0344 499 1000. Answers on that. Will America save the UK? There's a question. Think on that. Comments from you on the way. This is Talk.
Quite a staggering result for reform. I think bigger than even they were expecting. And it's going to have a few reverberations, isn't it? And we've already seen Keir Starmer this week coming out with all manner of sort of what you might have called right-wing policies about migrants, you know, saying that you're all going to have to speak English now when you come here, which if the Tories had said that a couple of years ago, they'd been denounced as Nazis and fascists.
No, that's not true.
Yeah, they would.
All government.
We've now
all government has said that, and they always.
Yeah, but the Labour government have never said it.
Release.
The Labour government have never said it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
There is a great book out, all about In COVID's Wake, it's called. How Our Politics Failed Us. This is a kind of comprehensive examination of COVID-19 policy and the discussion on all that happened in terms of lockdowns and mask wearing. There's two professors that have put this together from Princeton University in the States. They're going to join us in around about half an hour. It is really fascinating. Look, I know, you know, hindsight's a great thing and all the rest of it. But what these two have put together in terms of outlining how the liberal elite got COVID so wrong and could make the same mistakes again is absolutely incredible. This is really gripping stuff. They're both going to join us in about half an hour. Do not be missing that. Let's go back to your calls on trade and the like. Margaret is in Suffolk. How you doing, Margaret?
Well, getting fed up with the useless government we got because he couldn't organise a beer up in a brewery.
A beer up, I love it. What do you think of this? Have we got some big deal here? Is it going to make us all rich and we'll be popping the champagne?
Well, my idea is that no one should be appointed an MP unless they have had proper training on how to run our country and know what they're doing. And until they're taught this, they're just bloody useless, I'm afraid. And then when you've got idiots like Trump who thinks he owns the world and he's the biggest bastard in creation, he's so crooked.
That's a bit harsh, wasn't it?
No, it's not.
Okay, you're using the word intellectually, so we'll let it slide for a moment.
But no, he will... I mean, in the days when he lived in this country, he had a hotel built and it had a restaurant in it, just a sort of snack bar and, you know, hot dogs and things. And when the people had gone, they'd leave a little tip for the staff. And after they'd gone, he'd go along behind them and collect all their tips, and they never saw a brass farthing from them.
I'm sure he didn't do that personally, did he?
Yes, he did.
What would he be doing in a snack bar?
Well, because he owned it.
He didn't work in it, did he?
Oh, no, he just took all the profits he could.
So he flew in from New York to a snack bar in wherever and to nick some tips?
Well, no, he didn't fly in from America. He was living in this country at the time.
Right. I don't know when that was, but anyway, nonetheless, you don't think we've got a great deal and you don't think America are going to save us?
No, I don't think America's going to save us, not with him. I mean, he's going around as if he is already elected as their leader in America, and they haven't even had the actual elections yet. So who the bloody hell does he think he is?
What do you mean they haven't had the elections yet?
They haven't had the elections yet. He hasn't been voted on.
They had them last November.
No, they didn't.
They really did.
No, they didn't.
They really did, Margaret.
No, you investigate. There was no election held. He suddenly decided that he was the leader of the country, and everybody would do what he said. And everybody doesn't want to do.
But they had an election in November.
No, they didn't have a proper election.
Literally, America voted in November. Kamala Harris was for the Democrats and Trump was the Republican candidate. Do you remember that?
I don't remember him actually receiving the official vote count.
They counted all the votes up and he had more than the one he was opposing. So therefore, he won. And then they had an inauguration on January the 20th in Washington, you know, where he was sworn in as the president and stuff. So I think, you know, I mean, we can cross hairs on all sorts of things, but I think I'm right in saying that they definitely had an election. Margaret, thank you very much indeed. That's history buff Margaret in Suffolk. Thank you to her. Let's go to Billy, who's on the west coast of Denmark on this fine day. Billy, good afternoon to you.
How's it going? It sounds like Margaret's been enjoying the puns early.
I'm just trying to... I thought, is she referring to something I've not heard of?
No,
yeah, she didn't remember.
She's enjoying herself.
I mean, the idea that Trump's just walked into the White House one day, even if you don't like the bloke, I think we can all agree he won an election.
To be honest, it's not beyond the possibility of the realms the way things are looking in the world at the moment. But,
so what do you make of this trade deal, Billy?
Listen, America should look after America, Britain should look after Britain, and Europe has only looked after itself for the last 20 years with hoovering up all your industry and taking it over and distributing it in Europe. And the politicians allowed it to happen.
Where's our ally? Where's our best ally, do you think? Or who is?
I work all over Europe, Ian, to be honest, and we're hated. The only reason they use us for anything is because they've not got the nuts to stand up to anybody and they use their army.
And that's how you see it. That's how the land lies.
100%. And I'm actually in Germany at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm heading to Netherlands. And to be honest, maybe the Netherlands, France hate us, Germany, they still dub movies in German. Who don't even have British movies. They still dub them into German.
Yeah.
That tells you how it is.
That's a good indication where they dub and where they don't. Billy, I have to move for no other reason than we're about to hit the clock and therefore the news. Thank you very much indeed for that. That was Billy, who is actually Germany, Denmark, the whole neck of he's all over the place, is Billy. He travels. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news headlines here on Talk at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. Welcome back. 0344 499 1000. So, as you know, as we've been discussing, the UK has signed this first trade deal with the US since Donald Trump's trade war, with the government claiming it will save vital jobs, slash tariffs on British steel and aluminium, and cut car levies to 10%. Will America save the UK out of all of this? And where are our alliances best placed? With America or with the European Union? We'll take more comment from you on that. Also this afternoon, the Western political class is being criticised for mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic, with lockdowns and other measures slammed for lacking scientific backing and causing harm. We'll talk to two professors who've put a book together on exactly this. It's utterly gripping, and they're here to tell us more in around about 25 minutes. And under fire, Labour Minister Lucy Powell has made a humiliating Commons apology after belittling rape survivors by claiming grooming gangs is a dog whistle issue. This was something she said, I think it was on Question Time. It was an absolutely outrageous response from her. I don't know where she was going with it or why she did it. She got the backing as well of the Prime Minister. As, you know, they closed ranks and stuff. She now said, sorry, didn't mean that. This one comes in from Kath, who says, more Margaret, please. Ian, you were fab. I just wish I'd been watching instead of listening to the radio. Bet your face was a picture. Ed says, more Margaret, please. Yeah. Margaret's very popular. Margaret was our call just before the news. You'll have to listen back if you didn't hear it. Donnie says, will the US save the UK? We are a basket case. I'm not sure a few scraps from the table of the US will save us. We need self-help, and that starts from within. Labour and the Conservatives should be consigned to the dustbin, and the UK needs to get itself some proper leadership, says David in the snack bar, waiting for someone to leave a tip so I can nick it, just like Donnie did. It's quite funny that I mean, our tips just sort of left around like that anyway. I don't know. Interesting times. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Harry Phibbs is with us. Harry, of course, is local government editor at Conservative Home. Good afternoon to you, Harry.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us as ever. I mean, let's start on this historic deal. Is it a historic deal? I don't think it is. Is it a comprehensive deal? I don't think it is. It's just a deal, right?
I think it's a damage limitation exercise. It would be flattering to say it was a free trade deal. We'll still have the 10% tariffs as a base on our exports to the United States that Donald Trump imposed. And we get this rhetoric about winners and losers, which is misguided, really. To go back to a very basic, simple point about how we get rich is through trade, through trading with each other, through specialising in what we're best at, in division of labour. That happens within countries and across countries. And so really any restriction that we impose on trade is an act of self-harm. And so I think increasingly these very complicated, long-delayed trade deals are misguided in a way. We should just say we're open to trade with the whole world. As far as we're concerned, we'll have free trade, whether it's India, United States, European Union, anywhere else. And ultimately that helps our exporters too, because of course it's a complicated world and there are a lot of inputs. So they were giving examples of tariffs on aluminium, tariffs on steel. Well, that's relevant to our manufacturing industries, including our exporters. And so really we should get a mentality of free trade being the route to prosperity, rather than thinking of it in terms of winners and losers.
I mean, we do manufacture some stuff. You know, we make some things. We obviously export all sorts of stuff around the world. But it's hard to kind of define us, really, isn't it? You know, once upon a time, back in the day, you know, we were doing all sorts, from textiles to automotives, goodness me, planes, you know, everything would seem to be made in this country. But those days are long gone. So I suppose our kind of USP is sort of perhaps hard to identify. Would that be fair?
I think what people have difficulty getting their head around is the idea of services as exporting services. You think of exports as stuff, and you load it onto a ship, and in fact for us, and it's a good thing because it's a sign of our success, really, that we've got very great skills in all sorts of service industries, financial services, technology, all sorts of things, and we earn billions of pounds from around the world. But because we don't, and that's money coming in that different countries are paying our people to provide them with those services. So that, you know, it's exports, it's very important exports, but because we don't see it, we think, oh, if we're doing that and not doing so much in the way of making stuff, that means we're in decline. I mean, I think it's the wrong way of looking at it. We should focus on what we're best at doing, where we're competitive, what we can do that's better than other countries, and that's where we get the best deals. They get the best deals using us for the things that we're best at. It's been going back to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations of 1776. I mean, these arguments are not new, but there's somehow the instinct is always to think that with trade, are we getting diddled? Are we getting are we getting done over by the other side? And that then causes the thing to be gummed up by all these restrictions. We'd be better off having the self-confidence to say we're going to have an open economy, be open to trade with the world, and that would be the way for us to succeed.
There is a curious kind of sort of very left-wing argument, isn't there, that growth is the enemy of civility and decency, etc. If you keep aspiring to this thing called growth, then ultimately only bad things can come of that. I've never quite understood the fullness of that argument, even trying to kind of transpose my brain into the world of left-wing thinking. But I guess that is where we're at, though, isn't it? We don't have any growth, really. We haven't had any for absolutely years, not significantly. So maybe the sort of Greta Thunbergs of this world have got their way after all. Nothing's growing.
Oh, it's been disastrous. The net zero, the climate alarmism, saying the world's coming to an end, totally false. There has been some climate change, very, very marginal, and there's some benefits as well as disadvantages to it. But our children being told that the planet's coming to an end, and the mental illness and depression, and thinking that there's no point them having children. I mean, it's appalling, the scaremongering over that. But it's also had, of course, a big impact with our energy bills being much higher because of all the green levies and all the distortions as a result of that. I mean, that's one of the things that has made us poor and has damaged our economy. So the sort of miserabilism, the hair shirt mentality from the Greens has been very harmful. But so has all the restrictions on trade protectionism. I mean, really, we don't want to go back to the idea of being a siege economy and we're all kind of living in caves. We need to be trading and modern and taking advantage of the opportunities the world has to offer, and taking advantage of making energy as cheap as possible, using modern methods such as fracking to increase our energy supply, and it's a choice. There's nothing inevitable about us falling behind. We just need to make the right choices.
Yeah. Well, the right choices financially have been extraordinary in this country. I mean, 15 billion quid going on the cost of housing those that have crossed the Channel and others over the next 10 years. You mentioned the sort of net zero evangelism. We could look into all sorts of places, but the government believe they are on it. They're tackling stuff because there's a bit of a backlash going on over trying to save 7 billion quid, which is oddly quite small compared to the aforementioned migrant hotel bill. But Starmer is going to face a backlash. There's around about 70, 80 MPs, Labour MPs, that are not happy. Critics compare the proposed welfare reforms to George Osborne's austerity measures. They're saying you've got to delay this. But the government are standing by it. Rachel Reeves is standing by it. Is this going to be just an internal row? I mean, there's nothing more delicious than a sack full of lefties having a right-roaring row. I think we can all agree on that point, Harry, but where does it leave us? Is this going to be a reverse ferret from the government, or are they going to stick with it?
Oh, it's enjoyable that the Labour Party are having a row, but it's pathetic sums. I mean, the government's spending over £1 trillion. I mean, this is one of the things holding us back, is we've become a high-tax economy, and part of that is because the welfare budget has got out of control, and there needs to be looking in a completely different way. I mean, one thing is these high disability benefits, very much higher if you're given that classification than if it's a regular unemployment where you're available for work and looking for work. And we need to start by thinking, well, why? Because in terms of the grocery bill or the rent or the energy bill or the broadband, there's no particular reason why, even if it's genuine disability, there's no particular reason why they should be paid hundreds of pounds a week more than people who are able-bodied. If there's specific issues involved in terms of wanting to get a stair lift or something, then that should be a specific payment. But there isn't a justification for much higher payments. And in any case, a lot of the time, these are things where people could work, and some of the explanations given for people being registered as disabled, such as depression, for example, it would be much better. And a lot of the time, people want to work. And it could be that there's a genuine disability, but that wouldn't preclude them from doing any work at all. And also, of course, there's a lot of fraud where the assessments haven't been carried out rigorously. So the government's attempts to cut the welfare bill in terms of, for example, the disability, are pathetically small. And the fact that they've got Labour MPs complaining even about the very modest changes is a pretty discouraging sign for us getting back to having viable public finances and a proper low tax economy with people having incentives to go out to work rather than incentives to stay on welfare.
Indeed. And let's move to a high-profile minister. That is, of course, Lucy Powell, who's made what's being called a humiliating apology to the House of Commons. This was after an appearance, I think it was on Question Time, where she suggested that somebody brought up the issue of grooming gangs was playing dog whistle politics. Now, that is a phrase, dog whistle politics, but to have bolted it onto somebody raising, in fact, they simply referenced the Channel 4 programme on grooming gangs, and that was her response. I mean, it was an extraordinary response, even by her standards, to come out with that when someone had raised something that is so current, so topical, and so incredibly distressing for thousands of victims here. But she went down the dog whistle route. Now she's been forced to apologise.
Yes, I listened to this. It was actually Radio 4's Any Questions.
Oh, right, okay.
I worked for Conservative Home, and it was my former boss, Tim Montgomery, who now supports.
It was Tim, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah, and he was on the panel, and he in a very moderate and reasonable way raised his concerns about this, and I thought it was an astonishing, insulting response from Lucy Powell. I mean, insulting to Tim in accusing him of dog whistle politics, but far more significantly, of course, an appalling insult to the victims of these horrific gang rapes, which has been happening on an unbelievable scale, on an industrial scale. And the institutional wokeness of the police and council officials just turning a blind eye to it because they think, oh, we don't want to harm community relations is a massive scandal. And for Lucy Powell to have given that as a response and to have got away with it. She's in the cabinet. It's not just that she's still a Labour MP. She's still a cabinet minister, drawing a salary as a cabinet minister. Yeah. Absolutely despicable. And I raised this on Twitter. I highlighted it at the time, and then other people did as well. And I don't know whether Downing Street feel that they've got away with it because after a while, the story dies down and people discuss other stories. But I don't think it will be forgiven or forgotten. I think it's a disgraceful response, and I think that the anger will continue until those responsible for turning a blind eye are held to account and removed from positions in authority. I mean, this could still be going on. In all probability, this sort of abuse is still going on and not being properly pursued, properly punished.
Indeed. I mean, she's the leader of the House of Commons, for goodness sake. I mean, that's a big position, right? And she should be, one would have thought there would be more, I would have thought there'd be more said around the issue from Keir Starmer about this, even to the point of sacking her, given how the accusations of ineptitude around this issue and inquiries that aren't quite happening, or they're sort of happening but they're not really. Given all of that, he might have been slightly more robust about how he dealt with this.
Yes, it could be he's waiting for a reshuffle, and he thinks that well, he'll get rid of her then and get rid of some of the other cabinet ministers who are doing a particularly bad job. There's Bridget Phillipson, who's come up with these damaging restrictions on academies, and you get successful schools wanting to expand and have freedoms as to how they run their own affairs, and there's these changes which are now considered generally, I think, to be damaging to the academy schools. And so there are different ministers that are perhaps in the firing line for the next reshuffle. But I just think in this particular case, I mean, it shouldn't just be it's convenient to wait for a bit or let it blow over. I mean, she should have been out straight away, given the extent of the scandal. So no, I mean, just no. And when she did an apology, it wasn't a genuine apology. It was a sort of sorry, not sorry. Correct. First of all on Twitter, and then in Parliament yesterday, everybody could tell that when she said that she thought this was, oh, you're blowing your little trumpet, oh, this is dog whistle politics, is that dismissive attitude. That was her true belief. And therefore any apology is inadequate and bogus.
100%. Listen, Harry, thank you. Great to have you on. Have a cracking weekend. The sun may well shine. That's Harry Phibbs, local government editor over there at Conservative Home. 0344 499 1000. More comments from you. Windy says, or Andy in Coventry, says, great show as always. Everything comes down to energy prices. Until we scrap net stupid, we will not grow, reduce prices, or be better off. I mean, there's something in that, isn't there? I mean, you look at the cost of migrant accommodation and all the other bizarre you add it all together, we're talking multiple billions of pounds. Surely we can get ourselves out of this. You know, energy prices are just the crippler for so many people. Mike T says, afternoon, this trade deal, which has zero tariffs on aluminium and steel, puts Britain at a huge disadvantage in exporting to the United States. Our energy costs are so much more that we cannot be competitive with those across the pond. Trump knows this, and it'll be one-way traffic from America to the UK. More from you. We're asking the question, will America save the UK? Where is our allegiance best placed when it comes to trade? Should it be the EU? Should it be America? Based on yesterday, I mean, it's a deal. I know it's only the start, but it ain't anything fantastic. We'll have more details and comment from you coming next on Talk.
Quite a staggering result for reform, I think bigger than even they were expecting. And it's going to have a few reverberations, isn't it? And we've already seen Keir Starmer this week coming out with all manner of sort of what you might have called right-wing policies about migrants, you know, saying that you're all going to have to speak English now when you come here, which if the Tories had said that a couple of years ago, they'd have been denounced as Nazis and fascists. You know,
No, that's not true.
Yeah, they would. Of course they would.
All governments have said that, and they always...
Yeah, but the Labour government have never said it.
Release.
The Labour government have never said it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 23 minutes after 2 o'clock. Back to your calls. This will be George in Dundee. What have you got for us, George? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Good to talk to you again.
You too.
Another moan, unfortunately. You've just had the guy on, your conservative think tank guy.
Yeah.
Wanting to put disabled people on the breadline. Incredible. I find it incredible. He's after saying, how should they get paid more than unemployed people? The PIP payment is to help disabled people with aspects of their life that makes life more expensive. Notwithstanding that, people like my wife cannot work. What does he want them to do? What does he want my wife to do? She cannot work. I gave up work to look after her. So the PIP payment goes to my wife, or the Scottish Adult Disability Payment, which is the same thing, goes to my wife, and I get the carer's allowance for looking after my wife. If he wants my wife on unemployment benefit, does he want me to then say, right, I can't look after my wife because we're skint, so I'm going back to work? Not one penny should be taken off disabled people while we pay 1 penny towards illegal immigrants and we pay 1 penny in foreign aid. Not 1 penny should be taken off our own to give away to others.
Is it, George, can I ask you a question, George? As I understand it, and you will know far more about this than I do, it's not everybody on PIP. It's people that the government believe should be on a different kind of system, which would be more beneficial to their circumstances. So somebody like yourself probably wouldn't be affected.
But the thing is, Ian, right, and I really mean this, a lot of guys, well-meaning guys, yourself and the Irish guy that's on Talk, who's very well read on this subject.
Yeah, Peter Cardwell.
Say it shouldn't affect you. It will, and it does.
Okay.
Because we have got to go through this trauma now of applying and hoping my wife's income isn't cut for £700 a month to zip.
Yeah.
Now, that's a threat that's hanging over us in the next 2 years when my wife's review's up. That's the threat. And if my wife's income goes for £700 to zip, I can't look after her. I can't, to keep a roof over her head, I've got to go to work. For me to go to work puts her life in danger every single day.
Yeah, no,
and
I get that. I think you're doing an incredible thing by taking that level of commitment.
The thing is, Ian, I don't want praise because I knew that was coming and I saved very, very hard. But guys like that Conservative guy that was on there just blindly see this stuff, why are they paid more than unemployed folk, without seeing the whole picture sort of thing. Yeah. This government has wasted, and the government before, wasted so much money on COVID, wasted so much money on illegal immigrants, wasted so much money on foreign aid, I will not listen to guys like this saying that my wife gets too much money.
There it is. Well, I'd like to think, and I can't speak for anybody else here, that there's a general point and a general discussion to be had about how much money is spent, but that doesn't, you're absolutely right, George. If you're in that position, you're one of those people that is the recipient of something that's currently under the spotlight. Naturally, you're going to get grumpy about it. You're hardly sitting around trousering the cash going to Ibiza every weekend, right? And I get that, and I can understand why that could be, more than a bit troublesome when you hear people casually talk about it. I thank you for your call, George. Have a great weekend. I know he doesn't want the praise, but you sound like a top man, and exactly what I think most people would do to look after their other half. That's George in Dundee. This comes in from, thank you to Emily Miller as well for your kind words, who was, I think, more than impressed with Margaret as well, our previous caller. Brian says, I wonder if Margaret knows World War II is over, and if so, who won it? Over? Really? It only started yesterday, didn't it? We had a... Really? Oh, come on. Brian in Rotherham, please. I'm about to go to the battlefield at the weekend. Tell me it's over, you conspiracy theorist. This one in from David. Some news for Net Ed Zero. Canada has approved the construction of the first mini nuclear reactor in the West, beating Britain in the race to approve the technology. The government of Ontario has endorsed a multi-billion-dollar plan for GE Hitachi to build 4 small nuclear reactors, with the first to be operational by 2029. The project will create 18,000 jobs and cost £11.3 billion. And what's interesting about that, that's for 4 of these small reactors, which some people see as the answer, should be the answer, for the cost we're going to pay over the next 10 years for migrant hotels, which is £15 billion. Based on this, crunching the numbers loosely, pro rata, we would be able to get 6 for that 15 billion. 6 of these reactors, creating Lord knows how many jobs, and have it all done and dusted by 2029. Apparently we don't have the political will. And this from Kaz in Bedford, who says, I know this trade deal has saved many jobs that were days away from being lost, but I can't help feeling that this deal was rushed through so that Keir Starmer could be seen as the first to achieve agreement with the US, and was so rushed that Starmer wasn't prepared for a suitably polished announcement on a more appropriate day. Other governments haven't agreed before because there were areas that they couldn't capitulate on. Trump and Vance seemed too delighted with this deal for us to be the beneficiaries, and I fear the better deals are in the pipeline and with other countries, says Kaz. Yeah, and it did look like Trump in particular was very, very buoyant. And dear old Keir Starmer, it's like sometimes, what does it take to be a leader? You can, whatever Donald Trump lacks in, and some would say, and I don't say this to be insulting, in political intelligence, because he doesn't bat from that kind of conventional place. And enemies will say he's completely impotent when it comes to blah, blah, blah. Whatever he lacks in that, rightly or wrongly, he has bucket loads of charisma, and he's able to kind of sell it and tell it and lay it on the line. He can do that stuff every day of the week, do it in his sleep. And you sort of need a bit of that, in the same way that Farage can, in the same way that Boris Johnson used to be able to do that. And that awful phone call, and I'm not going to judge our Prime Minister based on a phone call, but it was awful to watch Mr. President Donald. It just, I mean, there's no one around him going, mate, you can't be, this just is all shades of wrong. And whoever put the green light onto the announcement happening on a speakerphone in a grey basement of a factory in the West Midlands, while the bloke he was discussing it with was sitting in the historic opulence of the flipping Oval Office, flanked by flags and dignitaries. And the indignity, as was pointed out by many of you, for Starmer. Peter Mandelson, of all people, the Prince of Darkness, is in the Oval Office, while Keir has almost got Stockholm Syndrome, tied to a desk in a basement somewhere. You can't make this up. 0344 499 1000. We are going to be speaking to Professor Stephen Machido and Professor Francis Lee in a couple of moments. They're from Princeton University in the United States. They put a book together called In COVID's Wake, How Our Politics Failed Us. This is a big examination of COVID policy, the lockdowns, the masks, the social distancing, how the liberal elite got COVID so wrong. It's very well researched. It's gripping stuff. They're going to speak to us next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's 25 to 3. More comment coming through as well. We'll come back to the Trump-Starmer kind of weird press. That was a weird press conference. Was it a press conference? Sort of a joint announcement? The president speaking into the phone, but from a very ornate, historic, beautiful desk. And our leader sitting somewhere what looked like a basement to most people on a speakerphone. And someone in the technical department had not wired through the feed properly. So what you got was phone quality announcement from Keir Starmer. I mean, it was just dreadful. This is politics. And this was also politics as well. The Western political class facing fresh criticism over its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, with lockdowns and other restrictions accused of lacking scientific basis and doing more harm than good. Two Princeton academics, Professor Stephen Machido and Francis Lee, say the so-called laptop classes put their own interests first, shut down dissent and overlooked the wider social, economic and educational damage. In their book, In COVID's Wake, How Our Politics Failed Us, they warn that unless there's more accountability and open debate, governments risk repeating the same mistakes in the future. We can talk to both professors now. I don't know what the collective noun is for more than one professor, but Stephen and Francis, good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. This jumped out at me when I first read about this about a week ago, about the book you guys have put together, because there was so much in it that we had talked about on this station, where we had gone there where other places didn't, whether it was the BBC or CNN. There seemed to be not just politicians suffering from a healthy dose of groupthink, but the mass media did as well. Would that be fair?
Yes, I think it would be very fair. We have evidence that the BBC participated in a campaign to ramp up fear among young people who it was felt were not complying sufficiently. The media constantly asked in the United States why more wasn't being done. Like many of the decision makers, they paid far too little attention to the predicted costs of these various measures, which were considered in lots of pre-COVID pandemic plans. The evidence for them was examined, and consistently in these pre-COVID pandemic planning documents, it was said that the evidence in favor of the effectiveness of all these measures was quite weak, poor evidence base, but it was also predicted that these measures would be very costly, and that costs needed to be communicated to the public very clearly by academics and public health specialists.
Indeed, and the legacy of that is still biting us all. I think it's certainly in the Western world. And Francis, I guess, would this sound reasonable? The very first lockdown, when this all first happened, and I can remember being on the school run to pick up my little boy from school. France, I think, had locked down, and there were lots of parents in the queue talking about, you know, we're going to have this, and the schools are going to close. And I'm thinking, this is, you know, these people are mad. These are tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists. You know, this is the sort of stuff that Alex Jones talks about, not real people. And yet, about 5 hours later, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson gets on the TV and says, we are locking down, you can't go out, etc. There was as mad as that was, Francis, there was a moment at the beginning when we didn't really know what this was all about, where we kind of slightly went along with it. We thought, OK, well, you know, these are the politicians and they've got very impressive scientific advice, the best in the world, speaking to the White House and Downing Street and the French and the Germans, etc. They must know what they're doing. And that seems to be how, to coin a phrase, how they kind of got away with it, because we all assumed they knew something we didn't know.
Well, it was an extraordinary policy cascade around the world, kicked off by the observation of what China did in Hubei province when locking down Wuhan. The initial reaction to that lockdown in the U.S. among experts was that, you know, they had never seen anything like it, that it was mind-boggling, that they must not be getting good public health advice. But as cases began to come down, and as the Chinese were able to take down the temporary hospitals that they had put up, the effort was pronounced a success, and the World Health Organization produced a report that recommended that approach to the whole world. Then you have Italy, which imposed the first nationwide lockdown. And then it sort of goes from there. In the U.S., there was considerable bipartisan support for the initial lockdowns, which were across the whole country and broadly supported by the American people. You know, public opinion polls showed that they were overwhelmingly popular. And so it was only over time that people began to question the approach, and that questioning began to take on a partisan character.
And that was the problem, wasn't it, Stephen? That we went with it for a bit, and then suddenly we started to ask questions. And certainly on this station, we were asking, you know, has anyone done an assessment of the other side of this? You know, we had this organisation, I'm sure that they came across in your research, called SAGE in the UK, that were these, apparently, the greatest brains that God ever put on the earth. Although when you actually went through the members of SAGE, it was oddly quite surprising what was lacking there, and often even any single qualification in proper science was lacking on some of those people. But these were people calling the shots and giving advice to the Prime Minister. And we were asking, you know, what about the other assessment? What about the economic assessment of this? I mean, we'll come to the sort of moral thing in a moment. But, you know, companies, we have people calling us up. Their businesses literally closed down, never, ever recovered. Is anyone going to do an assessment on that? And it appears that no one thought about that. How could we have found ourselves in a place where our amazing leaders didn't consider that to be as important as the health stuff?
Well, I think that's really quite remarkable. As you say, the UK had a planning document from 2011 that warned that lockdown measures could not be relied upon even to slow the spread of a future respiratory virus. So there was a good plan available in the UK. It was just ignored. Yes, I think it's the case that here in the United States, and I guess in the UK as well, there was a narrow focus on preventing deaths from COVID, preventing COVID transmission, and pretty much everything else was ignored. This was irrational, strictly speaking, because it was a cost-benefit analysis with no accounting for the costs. It remains the case in many American cities that business districts are still not what they were. They haven't fully recovered. And when businesses close, people's livelihoods close, there are life effects of that can alter people's life prospects for decades. So it was never just about the economy. It was about all of the other things that go along with human contact, the need for having funerals and weddings and celebrating life's great moments, and all of these were put on hold in a way with very little accounting for whether they would really succeed in doing any good.
And I thought it became apparent, I speak just as an observer and as a citizen of planet Earth and the UK. I thought it became apparent reasonably quickly that we weren't dealing with the bubonic plague here. And I sort of based this on the fact that I'd had one of those tests and it said, oh, you're positive. Didn't have a single symptom. I know you can't base it just on me, and nobody's disputing that people had COVID, and some of it, some people got it quite badly, but you can get influenza quite badly. So yes, it was there, but it was quite obvious that we weren't, most of us were not going to die, Francis. And that seemed to be almost an inconvenient fact to our leaders. Were they just scared of getting it wrong? I mean, I know there's some conspiracy theories around this that, somebody sitting in a cave in Argentina or whatever is controlling the planet with the WEF and goodness knows who else telling them what to do. And it's a lovely, lovely thought, and made all the better when you have those discussions over a couple of glasses of fine red wine. But nonetheless, in reality, I wonder whether this is a classic case of the politicians are just not that good, and they got scared. They didn't know what to do. It was headless chicken territory.
Well, I mean, the evidence out of China, the evidence out of Italy made quite clear who was at risk of severe outcomes. I mean, there's an enormous age gradient on the risk from COVID, and so that was known quite early. But, of course, politicians can't be seen as doing less than the maximum to preserve life. I mean, they were very afraid of being shown up by some other place as, having done better. And so you certainly, it was hard to face the voters and say, well, as we weigh the costs and the benefits, this is how we, this is what we would recommend. That was a very difficult message to deliver. And interestingly, this is something that the pre-COVID pandemic planning documents warned about, that political leaders would have these incentives to take unproven measures without considering collateral effects as a way to abate public fear. And so those documents warn that public health officials need to be clear with elected officials about the poor evidence base around these measures.
Yeah.
And yet, when when the crisis began, those documents carried little weight.
Indeed. And I think that's probably speak for everybody here. The older we get, the more we realise that our political masters, to coin a phrase, whether they're over there or over here, they're really not that good, not as good as people, not as good as they like to think they are. So we had this curious battle here where different political parties were almost falling over themselves to be stricter than the other ones. Boris Johnson was accused, if you'd locked down the country sooner, we wouldn't have all these dead people. There's no real evidence to support that, but that became the thing. So the Labour Party, who are now the government, would have gone further. The Welsh were doing one thing in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon, not exactly a name I usually reach to when I'm talking about brilliance in politics, but nonetheless, she was seen as having it under control because she was stricter than someone else, and Macron was being even stricter than they. This curious, vainglorious battle about who can lock us down longer and tighter than the next person, based on what, Stephen? Where were they getting this info from?
Well, the claim was that China had gotten it right. The World Health Organization mission that went to China in late February came back, issued a report that was a fulsome endorsement of the Chinese strategy. They claimed that China had beat the virus for the first time in human history by these severe measures. So the World Health Organization report contributed. A report out of Imperial College London, Report 9, issued on March 16th, also predicted, in the absence of severe lockdown measures, 2.2 million deaths in the United States by August 2020. So that was a frightening statistic. It also said, that report also said, that the costs would be profound and emphasized the importance of considering the cost, but didn't say much about them. So there were those riveting things. And then, as Francis said, it was the cascade effect of seeing other countries locked down
100%,
and people asking, why aren't we doing that?
Yeah. Did you think, either of you, Francis, when you were, we all went through that weird era of wearing these masks? I mean, it's kind of funny now you look back. It's not really funny, but you look back at it, and we were walking around wearing these things, and you had to keep, 7,000 miles from another human being, and shops had their little signs up, and you walked into a bank and there was a perspex thing between you and the... I mean, all of this. Did the penny drop? Did you think at the time this was over the top, that this somehow probably isn't borne out in science?
Well, I had skepticism early on. I'm a political scientist, and one of the things that we focus on in my field are failures of government policy and the circumstances under which government policy has unanticipated consequences. So it was a normal sort of thing to ask, whether this was really going to work. Can the whole of society be coordinated to stop the spread of a respiratory disease with symptoms that aren't even all that distinct from other respiratory diseases? So those are the kinds of questions that I was asking when we were all sent home from the university at midterm in March of 2020. And I was sort of wondering to myself, well, if these containment efforts don't succeed, how long will this go on? Yeah. Because there's no clear exit strategy here. So I had those doubts, and as I began to start doing some investigations, just sort of discovering that there really wasn't a science underneath these recommendations. It was sort of a theory that if we could just keep people apart, we can control this thing. But there wasn't an evidence base that this would work.
Well, it's the kind of thing, if you asked a 10-year-old, what would you do in a pandemic? That's what they would say, isn't it? Well, if everybody stays at home and doesn't go out and doesn't go near anybody, if you have chickenpox or something like that, you won't, therefore, no one else is going to get ill. That was the kind of thinking. And do you think, Stephen, that I mentioned at the beginning this phrase groupthink, is that really central to where it all went wrong?
Yes, we definitely think so. In April 2020, a major university center here, along with the backing of many independent foundations, said that we needed wartime unity, that we had settled on a strategy, and it was time for everyone to comply. And it became very clear that dissent was unwelcome. It was also the case that social media platforms started removing postings and messaging and arguments that we needed to re-examine our strategies. And so I do think that at about April 2020, there was a settling down on one policy. Those who said we need to rethink this, we should consider alternatives, think about the costs and so on, were marginalized. And in many cases later on, in the United States in particular, they were treated intolerantly. Yeah. So there was a lack of debate, lack of openness, and a lack of tolerance for dissent. And that was very unfortunate, because that's at odds with the fundamental values of science and the liberal democracies in which we live. Yeah. So there needs to be much more respect for dissenters.
Indeed. And just a final point, Francis. One of the most worrying parts of all of this is the thought that all of this could happen again. Every time I see one of the news channels put up breaking news from China, I think, oh no, please, it's not that. I'm delighted to know that it's just Trump having another row over a tariff. But, we could be in that place again at some point. Pandemics, are cyclical. Every couple of decades, one comes around. Based on what we now know, the fear is that the response might be something pretty similar. And obviously what we want is a response that is very different.
That's why it's so important to take a look back and to try to learn from what happened, rather than just turn away from an unpleasant episode that I think most of us would like to forget. And so, that's why Steve and I decided to work on a book on this topic, and why we hope there'll be a lot more efforts in this vein. It's painful to confront the possibility that, we took all these actions and, caused so much suffering, harmed children's education, piled up so much public debt, all in a futile effort to control something that was fundamentally uncontrollable. But if that is what we did, we've got to come to a common understanding around that, so that we don't make similar mistakes in the future.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you to you both. It's been fabulous having you on. This is an incredible book. In COVID's Wake, How Our Politics Failed Us. The authors there, Professor Stephen Machido, Professor of Politics, Princetown University, and Professor Francis Lee, Professor of Politics and Public Affairs at the same university. I would like to get your response on this. Now we look back at it. It's distressing, and we should be fairly unforgiving in so much of this story. We don't want to repeat what happened back then. But I think, to me, it more than the one thing it told me was about the ineptitude of politicians. The likes of the Borises and the Rees-Moggs who lord it around, and we think they know something. And we know from, the COVID inquiry and Dominic Cummings and some of the evidence that was given there, although I think that might have been to the Health Select Committee possibly, but nonetheless, we're aware that they really didn't know what they were doing. And that's the bit that I think is distressing, that we closed things down. We sent people absolutely tonto. Mental illness, kids not going to school, not being able to do, ordinary things, not seeing your relatives, not going to a funeral, not being able to hug your dying parent or even child. Goodness me. I mean, that's where we were at. Based on, well, we just thought it might be the best idea. Your responses, please, on this. 0344 499 1000. Now, we're going to continue. Voice of Doom with us in a few moments' time. And as if the giveaways didn't just keep on coming, this time to find out how you could be with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European, even worldwide football, pretty much, the Champions League final. Could be you there in Munich, weekend away, Champions League final. Plus, thanks to our colleagues at TalkSport, they're going to give you £5,000 as well to spend however you like. Have a listen to the details.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
There's now a caucus of what's called Blue Labour MPs. Blue Labour is a tendency within the Labour Party that's been around for about 15 years, which actually predicted the rupture between the Labour Party and the working class because of the party's position on things like globalisation and mass immigration. And understands that actually there is very much a small c conservative thread that runs through many working class communities. You can be Labour, you can be proud Labour, but still be a small c conservative. You know, the post-industrial Britain is full of voters like that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to our last guest. We'll take some comment on that as well coming through in the next section. Stand by if you're hanging on. Voice of Doom, day five? Day 5. It's the mystery voice with a political angle. Could be a politician, usually is a politician, past or present. Here's the question, who is this?
This is so interesting.
It's not Matt Hancock. I have to keep saying that because it does sound a bit like Matt Hancock, and every time we do it, about 1,000 people guess Matt Hancock. Not Matt Hancock. Who is this?
This is so interesting.
If you think you know, 87222. Don't phone in because we're not giving anything away here. 87222. Here's the voice again.
This is so interesting.
Yeah. Any thoughts who that could be? Think politics. It's a mystery voice. Well, let's play it one more time.
This is so interesting.
It's a bit too early to give too many clues away. But there it is. If you think you know, shout us up on that. If we get a correct answer, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to Monday. It's not a bank holiday on Monday again, is it? It's not this Monday. There's about 17 in May. I'm losing count and slightly the will to live. This one in from Michael. Afternoon, Ian. The trade deal, which has 0 tariffs on aluminium and steel, puts Britain at a huge disadvantage. I think I read this. I'm going to read this again, though. Exporting to the United States, our energy costs are so much more that we cannot be competitive with those across the pond. Trump knows this, and it will be one-way traffic from America. It is worth reading that again because it does highlight a very big theme that's coming through from you, that this is one-way traffic. Do you blame Starmer on this? Yesterday, when everyone thought, it's going to be a good deal, I had a load of people go, nothing to do with Starmer. He was only there for 5 minutes. Well, I mean, based on that, it'd be nothing to do with Trump either, would it? Because he's been there for less time than Starmer has, if you take my point. I don't, civil servants, God knows who else is behind this. Scott says, did Starmer have a bet with someone to see how many times he could say Donald in one press conference? It was cringe central. Voice of Doom, who's this?
This is so interesting.
Find out on the other side of the news.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome back. 0344 499 1000. As we've been discussing, the UK and the US and that trade deal, the first trade deal secured with Donald Trump's administration since that trade war. The government claims it will save vital jobs, slashing tariffs on British steel and aluminium and cutting car levies to 10%. But would it, if you don't feel it, if you don't sense it, if it's not having a knock-on effect, what is it really worth, and how big a deal was it? Or will America save the UK? We'll get more response from you on that. We continue to take calls as well and response on the back of our previous two guests on COVID. Pupils should be given military training to instill discipline, restore national pride and get them fitter, according to new polling. I went to an event yesterday where the Army Cadets were there. We were talking to some of those guys, and that's I think it's a fairly positive thing for kids to be involved in. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about? Find out more later. And as a part of our Talk Crime series, we're going to take a look at the extraordinary story of how a Cold War spy infiltrated not just Western intelligence targets, but a grieving mother's heart. There's a teaser for you. Netflix don't do it that well, do they? Goodness me. Details coming a little later in this hour. Stand by for that. Now, that issue of the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This is the voice that we were playing you just before the news.
This is so interesting.
This is so interesting. Who is that? Who is that, if you think you know? Well, these are some of the wrong answers. Chris Hancock. Who's Chris Hancock? Is he somebody else? Is he Matt Hancock's brother? Matt Hancock's brother. No, it ain't Chris Hancock either. Daniel Hannan, no. Mel Stride, no. Alex Sharma, no. Nigel Farage, definitely not. In fact, we haven't got a winner, which means it rolls over to Monday. Day 6, it's back. Maybe we'll be more successful then. Now, voters believe pupils should receive military training to instill discipline, restore national pride and improve fitness. A new poll reveals that over half support expanding the combined cadet force beyond the 268 state schools currently offering the initiative with minimal opposition. The New Britain Project argues that young people need more than education. They need pride, purpose and leadership opportunities. Let's speak to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, ex-NATO commander. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Hello, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. By a bizarre coincidence, only yesterday I was at a VE Day event, and it was absolutely lovely. This was in Sevenoaks. It was by the cricket field there, and everything was happening. And
I'm in Sevenoaks.
Yeah, I know you are. Yeah, so yeah, I mean there you go. You know exactly where I'm talking about, up there on the Vine, and it was beautiful. And the Army Cadets were there, and we got talking to these guys, and these are young people in their sort of early teens, and they were brilliant. They were talking about how absolutely positive their experience of being in the Army Cadets is, what it does for them. I know this isn't quite the same thing as having things in school, but it's in the ballpark of exactly what we're discussing in this respect about having education beyond just maths and English and the like, having those kind of experiences, and why military training and the like is great for restoring national pride, fitness and discipline as well.
Well, I think the problem is, Ian, there's too much emphasis on schooling nowadays and not enough on education. It sounds like they're the same, but they're not. Education comes from a Latin word, educare, which means to develop, to bring up. And schooling, of course, is down to those academic subjects. Now, the problem we've got in society today is a huge gap in developing young people, in particular, in life skills, in giving them the confidence, teamwork, resilience, all those other things that we take for granted as adults now, in my generation and yours. And that gap can be filled by military-themed training. Now, people could say, well, perhaps we ought to have a civil program that does all that. But the answer is very little can give you the coherence and also the meaning and also the sort of identity that you can get with military training. It encourages a uniform approach to a lot of things. And of course, it gets you in the great outdoors. It gives you teamwork. There are so many benefits. There is another strategic benefit, and that is we realize now that we're in a world which is pretty dangerous. Yeah. And we actually have to give people an insight into military training and also to military procedures, because it could be that we may be at war with somebody in the next 10 years or so. And we're going to need that reserve of understanding, even if we don't have the reserve of military skills that we need, if we're going to get our people mobilized for any sort of war or conflict.
It's interesting, isn't it, that I mean, to some people, there is a group, a kind of a thought process, Chris, frankly, a wonky one and a bonkers one that believes that, you know, the last thing kids need is anything that sort of touches, you know, that's old school, the military stuff. Any inclusion of that is not good for kids. When, you know, it seems that all the evidence suggests it's very much the opposite to that. And, you know, I know the anecdotal story I was telling at the beginning of the kids we were talking to yesterday, but nonetheless, I mean, there is a, you know, maybe our political masters that are in power right now might be some of those that think that way, that it's just not cool.
They do.
Yeah. And there's the problem.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Labour Party has reduced funding for combined cadet forces in schools. I was at an event recently where basically I was told I was fascistic. Bearing in mind I'm one of the few people that actually fought against fascists. That's a bit ironic, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And also elitist, and it's about white supremacy. These ideological approaches are very unhealthy indeed. But the fact of life is that if you're going to give a structure to people's lives, if you're going to actually say, look, I'll give an example, Ian. I went to a reunion of my school year. And now all of us were in the CCF, the Combined Cadet Force. Because it was mandatory when I was at school. I'd say out of the 48 people who were there, only 2 people joined the armed forces. I was one of them. But everybody else made a success of their lives. And that, to me, says, look, the skills you learned when you did this, you didn't take the route to go into the armed forces, but the skills you got, the experiences you had, set you up in a generation for success.
Yeah, I mean, it's there for all to see. The evidence is demonstrable, it's tangible, we can all see it, but telling the current government that they need to invest in this area, is that a battle that's been lost of all the battles you have fought, Chris?
No, I mean, you just could keep telling people, you know, there's a lot of things that are driven with the current government with regard to ideology. You've just got to keep hammering away and saying, look, you've got to see sense here. You know, Keir Starmer's suddenly got that he might actually get some political benefit out of defence. Well, it's all very well spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. Well, that's nowhere near adequate. We've actually got to get the country and society in the right frame of mind that it might have to go to war. Yeah. If you show weakness, people will pick up their weapons and they will take advantage of you. If you say, look, under all circumstances, if you oppose us, we have a country that is united and will oppose you, then people won't take you on. They won't take advantage of you. And so, you know, you've got to get people in the right frame of mind to say we're prepared to do it. One of the disappointing things is that only 18% of young people said they're prepared to actually fight for their country. Well, we've got to reverse that, because if young people aren't going to fight for this country, there won't be a country in future. You know, those of us who fought for our country know that it's rewarding. We know that it's necessary, and we know that there are some bad guys out there. And let's get going.
100%. Chris, great to have you on. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry with us on the programme. He's an ex-NATO commander, knows his way around this world like few others. It is extraordinary, isn't it, when you look at, you know, everyone looks at the kids as well and thinks, you know, what's the best? I think we can all acknowledge we've arrived in a place where the school model, I would never have thought this until having kids really, but the school model, the one-size-fits-all model, is kind of so ridiculous now. It's almost laughable. It wasn't so darn serious and life-changing, because that's the only model we've got. it would just be laughable. There's so many other things, and the hope as parents, the one thing you try to do, and it's not always easy and it's not always cheap as well, is get your kids interested in other things. You know, we also live in a world where you're bombarded with screen, trying to tell an 11 or a 12-year-old they can't play Fortnite or one of those kind of things, where instead they're going to go out and, you know, kick a ball around a field is not an easy conversation. I know this, but so we do our best to look for other influences, things they'll be, whether it's playing an instrument, doing a sport, getting out there, whether you go to Cubs, whether you go Scouts, all of this, guides, Browning, all of this stuff. And certainly up there, I think, you know, the Cadets is... I didn't do that. I was in the, you know, the Cubs and stuff as a kid. But the Cadets, a mate of mine did, and I sort of envied it. It always seemed a bit more intriguing and interesting. And, you know, I could see that the skills were obvious in terms of what they did and how they thought. I thought it was great. And having that extra, it's about having another dimension, isn't it? You're not going to stop kids, you know, you don't want to stop kids learning maths and English, but just going, you know, there's something else in life. Because you don't know that. You know, you're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You don't know about all the things that are out there and the way to look at the world. That's why you have adults around you. That's why you have parents around you and hopefully good teachers around you to let you at least have a peek into those other little dimensions and possibilities. And things like this are great. And I genuinely believe that, you know, the more of that you can do to a kid's mind, just at least opening the door, a little show and tell of, look, you know, you could do this. And if they get ahead and do it and embrace it, then the chances are, by a country mile, they will have an absolutely thoroughly wholesome and very positive, possibly even life-changing experience. Back to your calls. Let's go to David in Kent and reference our previous guest, David, about the lockdown and how politicians got it horribly wrong. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yeah, so my point was regarding the COVID, COVID as I call it, in the lockdowns. My opinion, this was it's like a kind of cult. It's a con. It wasn't an accident, in my opinion. And not everyone in government, but quite a lot knew what they were doing. And in my opinion, it was designed to implement and test how compliant and obedient the population could be, and to check that out, using technology to check on people and to implement technology to see if people would go along with not to check these test and trace, not visiting a restaurant, people in the home and that sort of thing. And 95% of the population fell for it because 95% of people are so stupid that they trust implicitly and totally in their government and the mainstream media, maybe yourselves accepted of it, in everything, in every aspect of their lives.
I can totally understand why you would draw that conclusion. The only thing I would say is whenever I've spoken, off the record or whatever, to any of the people that worked either in Downing Street or government or this area, it is, and I'm not talking about people who are lying to me, I mean, they find it quite funny that any of the people that they worked with could be that organised. They almost say, if only you knew it was bloody chaos. There was no organisation, there was no memos coming from anywhere. This was like, right, how are we going to deal with it today? I know what we'll do, we'll just keep doing what they're doing in Italy. Yeah, Italy are doing it well. Let's do what they're doing. It was more ineptitude than it was conspiracy.
I hear what you're saying, but you've got things like, for example, the fact, firstly, that, I mean, apart from your esteemed station, no one's really looking and asking questions about it. Nobody wants to look at it today. I mean, for example, £37 billion on test and trace. Complete, utter waste of time. That's equivalent to the salaries of 100,000 nurses for 10 years. Then we've got the shutting down of social media, as I think, as a
they did,
and all that thing, it just seems too coordinated to me. I know that maybe ordinary people at the low levels in government didn't get it, but I just sense there must be
I get it. It does look like that. But you've got to remember, let's say, for example, this is how somebody put it to me once, David, that let's say it was the bubonic plague, okay? And literally the fear that some people had that millions, hundreds of millions are going to die from this. Then you would do what they did, right? You would do the lockdown. You would do the, telling media you can't report that because you're just going to scupper things.
Yeah. Well, it obviously wasn't, though, and we knew that right early on. We knew that when the ship docked in Yokohama with mostly old, probably, if I know anything from what I've seen of people on cruise ships, fat people, and not very few of them died. And the reality was, we knew early on that it was not the bubonic plague, and as you said before, we knew very early on that most people would not be affected in a serious way, and yet we still did it. And why did we proceed with that? Then to me, this just smacks of more. It cannot just be total incompetence. There's a great deal of low.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Do you think the World Health Organization are perhaps central to all of this?
I think the World Health Organization are very much involved. The World Economic Forum, too, they've implicated in a lot of this, and it's about the technology and about the surveillance and this kind of thing. I mean, let's look at an example. If we take people like the Tony Blair Institute, he's obsessed about
digital ID.
So digital ID and this kind of thing. And it was a way of implementing that and applying that onto the populations. I really think that's a big part of it. And further on from that, I'd say also we've got how is it no one's looking at the relatively high level of excess deaths we're still seeing today and questioning what that's due to. Is it lockdown? Is it the vaccines? What is it? We're not seeing that either.
Apparently it's called long COVID, David. How fed up are you with that phrase?
Or possibly long vaccine.
Well, yeah, there's another Netflix show waiting to happen, right? We will see. David, you've been great. Thank you. David in Kent. I get that. I absolutely get that. You can string all that together, tie it all together, and you can join those dots. And I can only come back to, even listening to Dominic Cummings, that I mentioned, that evidence he gave to the, I think it was the health select. Do you remember he gave about 7 hours of evidence one day? And the chaos that he describes in all of this. Now, you could say that in the grander scale, if this was something more orchestrated, as David said, Dominic Cummings would know jack. He wouldn't know anything. In fact, even the skill of orchestrating something like this from the dark arts perspective is that even Boris Johnson wouldn't know the true story. They are implementing it maybe without even realising. There's no explicit instruction saying you've got to do this. They don't need that. That's how these shady cartels that run the world work. That's the kind of conspiratorial angle to it, that our leaders will do it without even knowing why they're doing it, because they're leaders and they sense that making big decisions or even making unpopular decisions is actually an endorsement of their leadership, because, you know, you've got to make unpopular decisions. That's part of the deal, right? There's some vanity involved in that, but there are an awful lot of people that would have to be involved in something that was that orchestrated. And certainly when I speak to people, they genuinely laugh off this idea that, you know, Tedros, whatever his name is at the World Health Authority, and Klaus at the WEF somehow had any kind of say in all of this stuff, to the point of what David is saying. But I mean, it sent us there, right? It sent us down that cul-de-sac. It was so insane, aside from the first bit of lockdown where we thought, oh my God, there's something horrendous going on here, we better follow this. And then we sort of started asking questions, and then we started to wonder why I've got this thing and I'm not dead, I'm not even ill. I know lots of people where I get that, not disputing COVID. So, yeah, and it was different to the flu. I've never seen that many people get flu in my life, right? So, yes, of course there was a pandemic. But you do ask the questions, and in the absence of reasonable answers, then you're forced to try and join some dots. Every theory is worth a look, right? 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk.
He's not a MAGA Pope, right? And the fact that this would have already been known, I think that would have worked in his favour. So they would have thought, this is a good, and of course I'm assuming, I don't know what the Cardinals are thinking, but they would have thought, this is a good foil for Donald Trump. We aren't going to get a MAGA Pope. But the fact that he was elected very quickly, or relatively quickly, I think shows that he also had managed to garner support from the Conservative faction as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's in from Gary on the COVID story. We'll talk more on the phones of this shortly. Gary says, it's tempting to claim that lockdowns were an overreaction to the pandemic, but here's a couple of uncomfortable facts for people of that persuasion. Firstly, Sweden, which is usually trotted out as the pandemic model we should have followed in the UK, had by far the worst COVID outcomes of all Scandinavian countries, with a COVID death rate almost 80% higher than their neighbouring Denmark, and more than twice that of neighbouring Norway, both of which, of course, locked down. The second fact is that immediately after Boris Johnson's government relaxed lockdown rules for the Christmas period, daily deaths from COVID rose exponentially, peaking at almost 1,500 a day, which was higher than when the first wave of COVID hit us 9 months earlier, and they had to reintroduce lockdown to bring the spread of the virus back under control. I know that everything that has happened as a consequence of lockdown has played out badly, but if you were in government back then and you saw daily deaths rocketing after having relaxed lockdown rules, what would you have done? Bang on. That's exactly what happened, as far as I can ascertain, notwithstanding what David, our previous caller, had just said. You are literally the person in charge, and you've got to make a decision, and somebody comes to you, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They used to make those press conferences. I'm sure a few hours before that, maybe in the day before, the Prime Minister had that data and was told, this is what it's looking like. You've just relaxed the rules and more people are dead. Now, they might not have died of COVID. They might have some died with COVID. That, by the way, is also a bit of a distraction. That doesn't make it any better because you died with it. Because you might not have died at all had it not been there. That's the point. It doesn't somehow dilute the severity of the COVID bit. And you're the person in charge, so you've got to make that call. Right? What do we do, Prime Minister? Last time you relaxed the rules, a load more people died. Do you want to relax the rules a bit more? And then, of course, you've got the opposition MPs going, no, you've got to go further and lock it. How does that one pan out? I wish when we spoke to our experts, our professors that we had on a little earlier who've written the book, we'd have had longer with them. But, time is always of the essence, and we could have put much of that to them as well. Let's go back to your calls. On the trade deal, this is Ian down in London. What have you got for us, Ian? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. It makes me laugh with all of this. Yeah. All I see is that at one time, this country ruled 2/3 of the known world, correct? Yeah. Great British Empire. Now, we're just a plaything between two parts. On one side, you've got America that would be quite happy to make us the 51st state of America. Mm-hmm. And you've got the EU that are will give the bait, look, you'd be much better off to come back into us because we've got nothing. We've got absolutely nothing here apart from the City of London, the financial markets. Yeah. Any of these high-tech companies, quite simply, they can get up at any time and the brains will either go and live in America or they'll live in the East, the Far East, or somewhere else. And that's the end of it, because quite simply, until we get rid of Mr. Miliband and his stupid net zero, as you keep saying, the energy prices are going to go up and up and up, and that will just ruin us. And, the thing with Trump and with Keith Starmer, it reminds me, remember the spitting image, the two Davids? Yeah. Hey, David, you're so wonderful. That's what it's like.
David Owen and David Steele, wasn't it?
That's it. I remember David Steele, but I couldn't remember the other one. Right? And it was David Owen was the sort of bigger one, which is like the Trump character.
Yes.
And you got Starmer, sort of, oh, yes.
Steele was the little wiry figure, wasn't he?
Yeah. And
It was. That's a very good analogy, actually. That was exactly what it was like. Oh, Donald, you are a wag. You know, it was a bit of that going on.
And it is. It's that sort of, oh, please, you're so wonderful. And it's that sort of thing. And it just sort of, and it will be, you know, I don't know if he's trying to play a fast one and say, well, I've done a little bit of a deal with America. Maybe the EU will be a bit more easy with us and give us a bit more.
Yeah.
Or it's just, as you say, that Trump will sort of say, right, I've done only a little bit with the UK. What do you want, the EU? And he'll give them a better deal and we'll be shoved out again. That's the problem. They've got nothing here to sort of offer.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. It will be, it's just going to, somebody has turned the lights off and everybody's gone.
Yeah.
And the lights have gone off because we can't afford the bills.
I mean, who would have thought, you know, when we were merrily going along our way through the latter part of the last century, that the biggest debate would be about the cost of heating our homes in the 21st century?
Because the whole thing was, we had the North Sea, lots of oil, right? All right. In some ways, they used to say, wasn't it? It was the wrong oil. It wasn't the petrol oil. It was better for other things. It was too good. They got the gas here. They got the mines and everything else, but it's all gone. And it's, you know, in some respects, yes, whether it was down to Thatcher, but I just can't understand why they had it all so good. Why didn't they build nuclear power plants?
I don't know. I mean, it's not like they didn't, you know, have any notice of this. Had they, somebody back in the day when the mines were closing, wouldn't somebody somewhere in government, I don't mean necessarily a politician, but a big advisor who's probably paid more than the Prime Minister, wouldn't somebody have flagged that?
Yeah.
God, you might want to think about a way we're going to heat our homes in the years to come.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, to a degree, it's, as they know, your military guy, Chris Parry, might have said, in simple things, why not build a nuclear power plant instead of the aircraft carriers?
Yeah.
Because everybody knows now, even the aircraft carriers themselves are too liable to missile attack. So quite simply, you don't need them. You'd be better off with submarines.
Yeah.
Right? But it is, this country is absolutely, as we all know, that it's, and with the Labour Party that's in the moment, you've got no business acumen there.
Yeah.
It's all theoretical, not practical knowledge.
And there is the biggest problem, certainly with this government, because there's no business experience there, I think I'm right in saying, whatsoever on the front bench.
And that's why you've got like sort of things like that Lucy Powell that got up and started sort of like speaking when she was on the TV. Somebody must have sort of said to her, whatever you do, don't say that. You'd give her a bit of warning, but it just seems to be, they just feel with the majority they've got at the moment, they can just say anything.
They're not very good. That's the problem, isn't it? They're not very good. You don't look at these people and go, wow, what a great political brain they've got. The way they're able to, you know, think in this direction and under this level of pressure. You know, there's no, I mean, Lucy Powell, goodness me, Keir Starmer, that's what we've got. I mean, it's horrendous.
You missed out the other two, Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner.
Indeed.
And Lammy.
And Lammy, I mean, this is what is running the show at the moment. It's so grim. And I know that, you know, they're not alone in ineptitude, even across other, you know, you look across the... I thought the one that, you know, got away with it most was Rees-Mogg, to be honest. I thought, you know, he might have run some stuff, but I thought, you know, if ever there was a charlatan on the front bench, I thought it was that fella who dined out with a posh voice.
Would you remember the picture of him sleeping on the...
Yes, I mean, I try to convince myself it must be Photoshopped, but of course we now know it really wasn't. He was pretty much asleep.
But then there was a Labour MP, a woman, that did exactly the same thing. It must be such tiring work going there.
Yeah, hard day's work, eh, for 100k a year.
Wonderful.
Listen, great call. Ian, thank you. Ian, down in London. I always thought Rees-Mogg was... You know, he was very, very engaging. He was very good to listen to. He was clearly incredibly, you know, intelligent in one respect. But I just don't think he was a good politician. I think he loved being a politician. He liked the idea that he knew stuff that we didn't know. Us lot didn't know what he knows, because he's the, you know, he was almost born into it. It's almost in his genes. He was kind of that. And yet, you know, people sort of loved him in a kind of Farage sort of way because he was against type. You know, he represented the working man. Rees-Mogg, really? And by the way, that's not about rich or posh people being in politics. We need loads of those people as well as loads of people from all backgrounds. 0344 499 1000. We are going to continue in just a moment. Part of our Talk Crime series, we're going to look at that amazing story of the Cold War spy. This is really gripping stuff. We've got a great guest on this in a couple of moments' time. Before all of that, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football, the Champions League final. That's clearly a biggie. And, of course, thanks to our colleagues at TalkSport, they are putting £5,000 in your pocket. £5,000 to spend exactly how you like. It's a beautiful combination of prizes. Here's the details.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League Final Competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4. We'll go back to some of your comments in a few moments. But as you will have been aware from last week, we started this. Over the coming weeks, we're delving into the minds of criminals and the like, that whole genre, and those who chase them, leading up to the world's #1 true crime event. This is CrimeCon. It returns to London on June the 7th and June the 8th. From the psychology of offenders to forensic breakthroughs, the fight against wrongful convictions will bring you gripping insights from some of the biggest names in true crime. Joining me this week is Paul Henderson, journalist and author of A Spy in the Family. This is an extraordinary true story of how a Cold War spy infiltrated not just Western intelligence targets, but also A grieving mother's heart. Now, there is a tease. Listen, this is, and Paul is with us, and we're delighted you are, Paul. Good to see you.
It's nice to be here.
Look, I mean, the whole crime genre, as I said at the beginning, goes across... this isn't just a whodunit like Agatha Christie style. This goes into all sorts of tentacles to this thing, right?
Yeah. There's many layers to this story.
Yeah.
And that the central theme of it is this amazing woman who was conned by the spy for a decade, and she's still alive today, having gone through World War II.
Wow.
And the Cold War with him, and she's 100 years of age and living in Holland.
Unbelievable. So tell us, I mean, obviously, you're not going to read from the book here. That would be extraordinary. It would be until about next Thursday.
Yeah, probably, maybe longer.
Maybe even longer. Yeah. So give us the story here. What's happened here? Where does it begin?
Well, it begins in wartime Holland in 1943. When Johanna van Haarlem, as a teenage girl, meets a Nazi soldier. He was Polish-born, but he was a Nazi called Gregor Kulig. And she was from a family that were actually working with the Germans in that her father was a builder of sorts, and he was renovating buildings for them and being paid for that. And she was used to soldiers coming to the Van Haarlem home in The Hague. And so Johanna Van Haarlem didn't see it as anything incredible that this soldier on a train had befriended her. And they became, when I say boyfriend and girlfriend, they only knew each other for a few weeks. But that's how it all begins.
Right.
And then Kulig invites her to a party in a barracks, and Johanna goes to the party, only knowing him for a couple of weeks. He gets her to come off of the dance floor and pushes her through a door, and he overpowers Johanna, this 18-year-old girl who was pretty naive, very naive, and had sex with her. She became pregnant. Her father, Isaac Van Haarlem, was a religious zealot. He was also, he became during the war a member of the Dutch Nazi Party, the NSB, and he called the baby she was carrying the war product, and he wasn't going to have her in the family home again. And then she gets sent to have the baby in a home for single mothers who had been either raped or had relationships with German soldiers, and that was in Amsterdam.
Wow.
And that's the beginning of the whole story emerges from there.
Yeah.
Because then, after she leaves the home with the newborn child, she manages to get, in the chaos, back to her family home in The Hague, carrying the child, and knocks at the door and begs her father to let her in, and he slams the door in her face. She finds a kindly doctor locally who takes her in for a few days, and eventually is forced onto a train by her father, and this train was heading east through Germany towards Czechoslovakia, and there she was with this newborn, and one of her sisters were with her as well.
So this was, I mean, goodness knows what was going through, you know, but at that point, the bewildering loneliness, devastation, everything, but this curious joy of having a baby, I guess, you know, despite how this had happened, etc. So where does this story go next?
Well, you know, you just mentioned there, Ian, about this joy of having a baby, but it's kind of mixed with a certain amount of grief around it in a way. She'd lost her family. The train stops in Germany, and it's going to be there for a couple of days, stopped. And she gets off the train and she finds a church and has the baby baptised by a kindly priest. And he was called Erwin Van Haarlem from that point. She gets back on the train, she ends up in Teplice in Czechoslovakia. And she tries to manage life with the child by going to work and having a childminder.
Yeah.
But the childminder could not cope with this young baby that was crying for its mother. So eventually she was advised by authorities, you know, you should take the child to a Red Cross home, it'd be better looked after there. And, you know, it was a terrible, terrible moment. In tears, she was handing over the young Erwin to the carers in the home.
Yeah.
And then the Russians are coming in from the east, the Allies are coming from the west, and the Russians are kicking out all foreigners from Czechoslovakia. So she had to leave, and she had to make her way back to The Hague without her child, much of it on foot. And then she's back in The Hague without the child. Her father, Isaac, allows her back in. But he gets sent to a detention centre for his collaboration, and serves almost a year in there. But they also lose their home, and she finds a roof over her head with another kindly family. From that point, she always had in her mind, I've got to find my child, I've got to find Erwin, and the Red Cross told her that they would always get in touch and let her know where Erwin was so that they could be reunited.
Yeah. And what happened to that little baby boy?
There's so much heartbreak in this story, and there are many, many layers, Ian. And without taking until next week, as you said, I'll cut through it. So she's at home. What she doesn't know when she's out at work is that a couple of times the Red Cross officials arrived at the Van Harlem home because they'd got their home back from the authorities, and to say, look, we've got Erwin, and if you want to be reunited, that can happen. She was never at home. Her father was, and the father was sending them away, saying that they didn't want this to happen. Eventually, Johanna finds out what's been going on, and an enormous row breaks out in the home, and Isaac even admits to his heartbroken daughter, we've had letters sent here as well from officials, but I've destroyed them all. And she insists that she should be allowed to get the child back. He says, you can't afford to, because you're as part of that agreement, leaving Erwin in the home, you have to pay for his keep over those several years. She didn't have any money. Eventually, the Red Cross turn up again, and this time with a contract. And the contract, and Johanna was there, Isaac allowed her to be there, said that she would have to pay for this several years or the child would be adopted. He told her bluntly, I'm not giving you the money. He had the money, but he wouldn't give it to her. And he forced her to sign this document. So, to all intents and purposes, she's losing Erwin for a lifetime.
Wow.
And she's distraught. The Red Cross leave. Erwin gets adopted by a lovely couple in Moravia called the Radex.
They lost her son twice, basically.
She did lose her son twice, yes. And he's being brought up there, but all the time Johanna's harbouring this idea of finding him. She marries, she has another child. That husband doesn't want her to look for Erwin, her father doesn't want to look for Erwin, but she keeps on. And then eventually she is contacted by the International Red Cross, and they say, look, we found Erwin, he's in London. And that was just a fantastic moment for her. And then this was around 1977, and she decided, you know, somehow I've got to go to London and find him, but I need an introduction from the Red Cross. So letters are exchanged, and eventually she exchanges letters with her long-lost son. And he says, this is great news, Mother. Please come to London. We can be reunited. And she travels there over the new year of 1978, the beginning of the year. And she's walking, she knows the area he lives in, she knows the address, and very nervously she's walking around the area before their assigned meeting later in the day. And a voice says, are you Mrs. Van Harlem? She says, yes. He says, I'm Erwin, I'm your son. And
Wow.
They embrace in the street, and she's weeping tears of joy. And then they start a relationship for the next 10 years.
Well, we've not got long. Just give us a little tease on the spying aspect of all of this.
So this is really interesting because myself and the co-author David Gardner have unearthed 10,800 pages of Secret Service documents in Prague, and they demonstrate to us what was going on with the spy. And while he was in London acting as Erwin van Harlem, so it wasn't her son, he was looking for Polaris nuclear missile secrets that we had in this country. He was looking for other nuclear intelligence, and he was sending all this information back to Prague and effectively Moscow, who were controlling, you know, and then he does something quite incredible, bearing in mind that his position, and he was becoming paranoid. He was also infiltrating Jewish groups who were campaigning for the release of refused Jewish refuseniks in Russia. And he got so friendly with them, he was allowed to go through all their files, which had information throughout the world about their activists. They were politicians.
He was good, this guy.
He was
as
really
a spy.
And not only that, don't forget, he's living this lie for all those years. And now he's got a mother, and he's turning himself on to the fact that, you know, I'm a mother here, I know I'm a spy, but he's juggling. And then he actually takes a trip with this organisation in London campaigning for the Jews in Russia to Washington. And he's in a meeting attended by President Reagan, Walter Mondale and Frank Carlucci, who was the defence minister. It was a conference, but they were in the same room. And all the time he's gathering intelligence. It was his most audacious mission. On another occasion, he was in New York. And and I'm learning that we are learning all this from the files.
Sure.
And he's in New York, and he's in another very important meeting. And during this meeting, they clap him as a favoured guest, and say this is incredible. He writes to his handlers in Prague, they're so stupid here, I'm a Czech spy, and they're clapping me.
Yeah.
And then he's back in London.
Psychology in that as well.
There's immense in the book. You know, the book really needs to be read because the psychology is just incredible.
Listen, the fuller story can be heard at CrimeCon, of course, because you're going to be there talking more about this. I'm sure you're maybe even taking questions. I don't know how that's going to work in that format. I'm sure it will be. That is on the 7th and 8th of June down in London. You can look it up and find out how to get tickets, etc. The book, A Spy in the Family, Paul Henderson, who's with us in the studio, and David Gardner, your co-author on this. Lot of diligent I mean, you've been a journalist for years, but this must have tested you in terms of, like, digging.
It really tested me.
I bet it
And
did.
there's a great end to this book, but I'm not giving it away.
No,
because Johanna keeps searching for the real Erwin.
There it is, and that continues.
Yeah.
There it is. Good to see you, Paul. Thanks for coming on with us. This is Talk.
this is not a trade deal. It is an alleviation of some of the tariffs, especially on steel and cars.
Yeah.
So steel and cars are back down to 10%, and steel and aluminium's on 0.
Right.
Everything else is still paying those extra tariffs.
And also,
so
this
isn't a deal.
Much
it's
to be
partial
discussed,
relief.
isn't it? Like the pharmaceutical stuff is still to be discussed.
Yeah.
Lots of other things still to be discussed.
Yeah, and we're worse off because we're having to take... So there's a manufactured crisis here by Trump. Long-term tactics aside, this is a manufactured crisis for which we've got a partial exemption, and we've given the Americans some stuff in return.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. It's just gone 10 to 4. And just a reminder then, CrimeCon, this is the world's #1 true crime event. It returns to London. This is big stuff. 7th and 8th of June. And as you heard there, that was just one aspect: spy, espionage, criminality, all sorts of areas. Next week, we're going to take you inside the walls of Belmarsh Prison, one of the UK's most notorious prisons, to hear what life is really like on the inside. You hear a lot about Belmarsh. We'll give you the inside story. You can also download and listen to all Talk Crime episodes on your preferred podcast app. This is Talk. Let's get back to more of your comments. This one comes in from Trevor in Harrow, who says, afternoon, Ian, and this is about where we were discussing the cadets in schools and cadet kind of training, if you like, or information. Good afternoon, Ian, says Trev. How comes when I suggested a combined today unit for schools, I was told it was jingoistic imperialist, when all I wanted was a sense of pride and discipline for our youngsters? I myself could have turned out into a completely different person had I not been a sea cadet at the TS Recnone, Croxley Green, for many years in the 1980s. I think it should go further. If children don't want to do military activities, they should be working in parks and railway stations, tidying, gardening to make it safe, feeling better for everybody. To start with, the governments and the elites have to stop telling us we're all white supremacists, I think it should be. Trevor, great point. Thank you for that. And also, referencing the Sea Cadets, Angie in Peterborough says, my son joined the Sea Cadets. He was always a good lad, very caring, but lacked confidence. The Sea Cadets gave him so much of that discipline, and he grew to love working as a team. It was one of the best things he could do growing up, and I recommend it to all teenagers. And that's great to hear. It's interesting, is it, the point of working with a team, something that comes up time and time again when we're discussing issues about how to kind of better yourself. And they often say about voluntary work being a good thing. Voluntary work could be something that would be beneficial in lots of different ways because it does have components to it. You don't realise what you're educating, that part of your brain. Tim says, I'm a UK veteran, joined at 17. Best years of my life for 10 years made me who I am today. 100% agree with the Rear Admiral. Thank you for that, Tim. And one here that comes in from Laura in Kent. The pandemic response, reference a couple of guests we had. Please discuss the pandemic treaty. What will this mean for us if another pandemic happens now? We have a Labour government. Bear in mind, pandemics usually happen around once every 100 years. I'm told they happen once every 20 years. I mean, Laura, I could be wrong, but I remember when COVID happened, they said, every 20 years we get something like this. I think it depends on which one it is, because we've never had the lockdown thing before, so maybe it is of this level every 100 years. I don't know. Either way, let's hope that if we do, they don't lock us down again, because we don't want that. And one in from Caroline, who says, in fact, we read that one about the trade deal, didn't we? Rob says, Starmer hasn't got a positive trade deal. The UK ends up losing. We don't have to look at the fine detail. Labour always produces a negative result. Although I would have to say, yesterday, when a lot of people assumed it was going to be a good trade deal, I was inundated with people contacting me saying, nothing to do with Starmer, he had nothing to do with this. You know that thing that happens, Peter Cardwell, don't you? Loads of it. I had loads yesterday saying that. Nothing to do with Starmer, he can't take any credit for this.
Yes.
Now it doesn't look that good. Apparently it's his fault.
Yes.
I don't know whose fault it is.
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to someone the other day who actually played a bit of a trick, not quite a trick, just a little experiment on their friend, and played something that a Reform UK candidate had said to their very liberal, lovely tree-hugging friend, and said, that's a Liberal Democrat MP. He said, oh, it's sort of quite reasonable. That's quite reasonable. And then said, actually, it's not. It's a Reform UK candidate. Oh, it's dreadful. Oh, it shouldn't be allowed.
So strange, isn't it? How that happens. And we're all a bit guilty of it. And that kind of confirmation bias that happens. I mean, I never thought I would see... I mean, I think the winter fuel allowance thing is the most spectacular. Seeing people who dined out on the idea that the Tories were evil.
Yes.
They were horrendous. They were taking the wheels off people's wheelchairs. That's how bad they were. They hated disabled. As if there's such a predisposition of
and you can just
hating
say,
disabled
and you
people.
say, well, Keir Starmer's going to get grannies to freeze. So.
Indeed. But many of those commentators on the left who wrote, I don't know how many column inches or broadcasts for hours about how evil the Tories were, and they'll take away your winter fuel, blah blah blah, and then
sell off the NHS.
Sell off the NHS. That's the classic,
one every single time.
It's never happened.
The Tories are going to sell off the NHS. It's never happened. Yes, there's more private healthcare. Do you know what? I asked Wes Streeting, the health secretary, on Sunday.
Oh, you did, didn't you?
On Sunday.
Have you got the answer?
No, I haven't got the answer yet. How
much private healthcare?
What's the total since Labour came to power? What's the number? And what's the proportion of the health budget?
Because the biggest
answer came there, none.
The biggest, the